Tyson Fury, Floyd Mayweather, Canelo Alvarez. Just hearing these names makes you think money and the hundreds of millions of dollars, pounds or Saudi riyals in boxing. But that's at the top. At the bottom, it isn't quite the same. Even for those on the rise, there's not an awful lot of cash in the boxing world. And if you're just starting out, well, it can be a very costly exercise indeed. But don't take my word for it. Here's the former European champion, talkSPORT's Spencer Oliver.
You're turning professional and you're boxing, let's say, York Hall on a non-televised fight. You have to sell tickets to earn any money, but you have to cover the wages of your opponent as well. So if you don't have the ability to be able to sell enough tickets, you effectively have to pay to fight.
A far cry then from Jake Paul facing Mike Tyson in 2024, when the purse was reported to be around £48 million. But the vast amounts of cash lining the top dog's pockets isn't the norm in a typical fight.
Let's say you're lucky and you get between 5 and 10 grand. You're going to get 10 grand max for that. 10% goes to the trainer, 25% goes to the manager. Then we've got the tax man to pay as well. So we're cutting that money in at least half. So now you've got 5 grand for a 10-week camp. So you're talking about a guy here earning, he might be clearing 500 quid a week. How do you support a family on that? So boxers chase the dream. And, you know, there's probably 2% of them that actually make it.
So say you do make it and you start to rise up the ranks. Strikers Boxing, a training academy, says the mid-tier fighters can earn more, somewhere between £10,000 and £50,000 a fight, depending on record, profile, opponent and popularity of weight class. It's only at the top level does the real cash start flowing in, with the top-tier professionals, i.e. those going for titles, earning 6 figures a fight. Something else you'll have heard of is the terms prize fighter or journeyman. A prize fighter is, as it sounds, someone who picks up fights where they can and gets a nice big check if they win. Journeymen are the fighters who take on up-and-comers, effectively used for experience in the ring. Even if they're going up against the real prospects, a young Anthony Joshua, for example, these guys will be lucky to earn more than 10 grand. So the average boxer isn't as rich as you'd think.
Yeah, welcome one, welcome all once again. Back at 9 o'clock here on Trans Europe Express on talkSPORT. I'm Danny Kelly, and for the next 3 hours, myself and Andy Brassell, without whom there would be no show. We'll take you through everything that's been going on in European and world football. Obviously, we'll take you through some of these international things that have happened over the past 3 days and continue to happen over the next couple. Mbappé Watch will be here. Tim Vickery will join us from South America, and no doubt, I think he has got all the qualifiers bar one now for the World Cup, which means, you know, there's a couple of teams who've missed out. You know how South America goes. Brian Sciaretta will join us, US sports expert, on the big match that happened during the week between the Seattle Sounders and Miami and all the rest of it. There's a million things we've got to go through. International football also on our screens. We'll be bringing you updates from the game between Germany and Northern Ireland, where with just about an hour gone, it remains Germany 1, Northern Ireland 0. I'm Danny Kelly. He's Andy Brassell. You're the listening millions, and this is Trans Europe Express on talkSPORT. Good evening, Andy.
Evening, Danny. How are you?
Really, really good. I'm going to start, I think, with France and their international adventures, because something has happened that, you know, will be causing consternation with Paris Saint-Germain, but maybe, and they're really fed up with France, but it may be that neither of these two organisations are actually to blame. To cut it short, two of the best players in the Champions League winning team, Dembele and Desiree Doué, played for France against Ukraine and were both injured, are now out for weeks, in one case 4 weeks, and 2 months in the other. And PSG are not happy.
Yeah, they're not. But before we get to those two players, and while we're talking about amongst the best players in the world, I have to bring you an update from Konya. 63 minutes in, Turkey 0, Spain 6. We've just had a second goal for Pedri in that game. Pedri scored the first goal. He's just slotted in the second. Lamine Yamal is, if we're talking about people making a push for the Ballon d'Or, as media-wise, we have been recently. There's been a lot of support for Lamine Yamal from people across the world, including obviously his teammates, but also Lothar Matthäus standing up and saying he should get it. He's had a brilliant game. Obviously, Turkey are continuing to be very open, but Spain are playing formidably, which Andy, I guess takes us back to this idea, Danny, of the fact that when we were at the end of last season, I had that feeling that we were going to have a PSG-Barcelona rivalry in the Champions League for years to come. And who knows, maybe we still will. But Dembele and Doué, two guys who also could have a claim for the Ballon d'Or, I think it's fair to say, because Doué was the best player in the Champions League final. Dembele has had a sensational 2025. And now, we're not really talking about the fact that France won in Ukraine, because that's really a side issue when it comes to talking about this, because we're talking about really the future of football and not just the coming games, although this clearly affects those. So, as you say, Dembele out for up to 8 weeks with a hamstring injury, which he's got a history of, although it's his other hamstring rather than the one that was recently injured. His left one was recently injured in the game of Toulouse last weekend. It was his right one that went in this game in Ukraine. But he came on as sub to replace Desiree Doué, who had hurt his calf in the first half, and he went off. It looked like it was just maybe a minor thing, and then he was seen limping coming out of the stadium. He's going to be out for 4 weeks as well. So this means these guys are going to miss at least the first two Champions League matches. They're going to miss the away game, Le Classique, at Marseille. So this is clearly going to have at least an influence on the nascent part of the season. And I guess there's probably a lot of us who are feeling this is not really to do with this game, that this is inevitable, because, of course, these guys have not really had any break. Where did last season end for them and this season start? And with their participation to the final of the Club World Cup, they played every single game, because, of course, they're in the playoff round, the Champions League, that they could have last season. So we're still putting in the Club World Cup with last season, right? But if we are,
I don't know anymore about
every
that.
Possible game. I don't know either, but I think they've played every possible game. That's the bottom line. And so why PSG is so annoyed is the sense that those guys, and especially Dembele, were in the red zone and perhaps susceptible to injury. They'd sent a registered mail to the FFF, the French Football Federation, to say, look, can we be careful with these guys? So the fact that Doué got injured, okay, you can think that's maybe rough luck. But Dembele, they're absolutely furious about it. That arguably their most important player is going to be unavailable for them for 2 months, and they think France should have taken steps to avoid it.
Andy, I'll come back to France in just a second, but I can't take my eyes off Turkey 0, Spain 6. We saw what happened. Sorry?
Same.
Yeah, we saw what happened to Mourinho. We saw what happened to Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. Can Vincenzo Montella survive a 6-goal whacking at home?
I think the answer is probably no, even though Spain have been sensational, even though he's globally done great work with Turkey, and he's someone who, he's not one of these overseas coaches who phones it in, who does it from a distance. No. He's someone who's really immersed himself in Turkish football culture. Of course, he was a coach at Adana Demirspor, where he took Mario Balotelli before that as well. But surviving this sort of result is going to be tough.
Yeah. We were talking before the show, and, this business with the injuries to the two French superstars, I mean, let's be fair, the season was extended in a FIFA competition, the Club World Cup, and they become injured now in a FIFA competition, the World Cup qualifiers. Sooner or later, whether it's the French Footballers Union or FIFA Pro or whoever it is, we are going to have a proper showdown. Someone somewhere is going to watch an empty pitch because the players will refuse to play sooner or later, because it's insane the amount of football they're being asked to play.
It is, and it's a great point, Danny, to bring in the French Players Union as well, because they've released, I don't think strongly worded statement does it enough justice, really. They're maybe even angrier than PSG. They've said that on behalf of their members, they've talked up about the calendar, and they've just been roundly ignored, really. So I think this is quite sort of typical of modern politics, in that you've got PSG and the FFF having a go at each other when they're not the people at fault. I think, you look at it, is FIFA are hugely responsible for the scheduling, and there is no real way of escaping that they've put the players in a position where if they want them to compete in all their conditions, there's no way to do that. And Didier Deschamps, I think, sort of inadvertently gave a little bit of life to that when he said, well, look, it's infuriated PSG what he said, but he said there's no such thing as zero risk when you're playing players. Now, what he meant is to say, well, you can talk about red zone, but look, the fact is players get injured, and that's that. But I think actually what it could be interpreted at is there's no such thing as zero risk with the calendar being the way it is.
Well, exactly right, Andy. There's no such thing as zero risk. You can get injured in training. But if you're forcing people to play, in these cases with these lads, 60 games a season at the intensity that the modern game is played at the top, then you are exacerbating that risk. There's no risk-free football, but you are asking for it with the way this has all been going on. We'll come back in a second and we'll look at how Portugal and the Netherlands have been getting on. Record goal scoring for both countries in the recent internationals. You'll listen to Trans Europe Express. Yeah, we'll talk about Portugal and the Netherlands next. But first, we need to go back to Germany. There's been a goal in the game between that country and Northern Ireland. Which way has it gone? Ian Abrahams.
2 goals, both to Germany. Germany 3, Northern Ireland 1. And the brave effort of Northern Ireland surely now has come to an end. First goal came on 69 minutes, ball in from the left-hand side for Nadim Amiri, pretty much in front of an empty net to steer the ball home from 6 yards out. If that was a bit unusual, the second goal was absolutely sublime. Free kick, 25 yards out, left of centre, up steps Liverpool's Florian Wirtz, and he's put it over the top of the wall, the highest part of the wall. No chance for Bailey Peacock-Farrell, who actually had denied him with a wonder save from 6 yards out about 10 minutes ago. Ireland had equalised through Isaac Price after Serge Gnabry's goal, but Germany, who might have thought they'd lose 3 in a row, aren't going to be doing that tonight in Cologne. It's Germany 3, Northern Ireland 1 with 18 minutes to go.
Thank you very much, Ian. Yeah, but the very stern resistance of Northern Ireland apparently broken there, and what a fine goal it was by Florian Wirtz. Andy, let's talk about Portugal and the Netherlands. Robin van Persie, Marco van Basten, Dennis Bergkamp, Patrick Kluivert, Ruud van Nistelrooy, Johnny Rep, Johan Cruyff. I mean, these are the great and good of European football, and yet none of them now are the leading goal scorer for the Netherlands.
No, that's right. It's Memphis Depay after today. Yeah. So they won 3-2 in Lithuania, and we'll talk about the little bumps in the road in a minute. But it's a great achievement for Memphis. He's now got 52 goals. He scored the opener and then scored the winner after they've made it really quite difficult for themselves in Vilnius, the Netherlands. And Memphis is a funny one, isn't he? Because he's, I think, easy to mock. He's often ridiculed, but someone who came from a very difficult upbringing and I think, talent, incredible self-belief, maybe too much self-belief at times, and just perseverance has got himself to this point where he's become the country's top scorer of all time. I think a pivotal part of it, of course, is where he stops being a wide forward and becomes a centre forward at Lyon, because mainly the coach at the time, Bruno Genesio, who's now at Lille and has done a very good job there, thinks he's a defensive liability. So I won't pick him for the big games. And in the end, he said, you're never going to cover your fullback. I'll just use you as a centre forward. And really, that opens it up for Depay. And he goes on to, of course, get his move to Barcelona. Doesn't quite work out, but ends up at Atletico, now in Brazil with Corinthians. I think it's an extraordinary story, really, of perseverance, and the fact that however many people have mocked him or said that he's not quite elite level, he's not listened to any of that at all, has he? Of course, he does the famous celebration where he sticks his fingers in his ears, which is actually meant to say, I only listen to God. But really, I think we know what it also means, don't we?
Listen, it's also an indicator of the way world football is going, that here you have somebody breaking the national scoring record for a major European country, a country that has won the European Championship and in my mind ought to have won a World Cup by now. And yet that player is playing at the peak of his career in South America. Things are changing, Andy.
Yeah, that is true. I guess it shows how much that Memphis divides opinion, really. But of course, people will also say, as I think you quite rightly point out, how much football is played nowadays. It's worth saying that the player that he's overtaken at the top, Robin van Persie, who we do think of as a great of Dutch football, and I guess less people would say that about Memphis, that they got to 50 in exactly the same amount of games. 102. It was his 103rd cap today, and that's the moment that which he's overtaken RVP. But look, I think if we're talking about the Netherlands in general, and we're talking about being shocked by aspects of what they're doing, I think the other part of it is you've said a few times you'd love to weld the Dutch defence to
England's forward resources,
yeah, and I think that would be really interesting. But it let them down today. So they were 2-0 up, absolutely cruising. Quintin Timber scored the second goal, and they're super comfy. And then they concede two really quite bad goals in double quick time. The first one set up by a Lithuanian player dribbling through the entire Dutch defence, which shouldn't really be possible. Virgil van Dijk's doing that face by the end of it. You know the one I mean, when he's really not happy. And it's in fact the lowest ever ranked team since we've had FIFA rankings since 1992 to have scored against the Netherlands. 143rd in the world, Lithuania. And I think Ronald Koeman will be a little bit concerned.
Okay, let's move on then to Portugal, because of course they won handily against Armenia. The interesting thing about this is the extension of the quite now bewildering scoring record of Cristiano Ronaldo, and the fact that, again, world football is changing. All of the goal scorers in the 5-0 victory over Armenia play their football in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, they do. And it's funny how the discussion that we've had, and we had it with Jordan Henderson, and I suppose to a lesser extent Ivan Toney over here, of should they be picked anymore once they've gone to the Saudi Pro League? Well, that has quickly ceased to be a discussion in lots of other countries, because I think people have quickly accepted that it's the prevailing wind, that a career is short, and there's no point cutting your nose off to spite your face, really. So those players need to be considered. I mean, look, I think João Felix, who scored 2, Cristiano Ronaldo, who scored 2, we know plenty about the reasons behind him going to Saudi Arabia, and age is at least a part of it. And maybe the odd one out in these 5 Portugal goal scorers, João Cancelo, who had a brilliant game on the right-hand side. There is a sense that, that is where football is at the moment. And, of course, Cristiano Ronaldo has had a huge effect on it. The fact is, since he moved out there, Portugal was the first major European country to sign a TV deal of substance to show the Saudi Pro League, for example. And he was instrumental in making sure that João Felix came over. Of course, it's slightly different because he's been a bit lost as a footballer. And from a Portugal perspective, to have him playing regularly anywhere, I think is pretty useful, because, at 25 years old, he kind of run aground, really. He burned through a load of clubs, and you're thinking, from someone you should maybe build a team around, he's become someone who you might give a couple of minutes here and there, and that couldn't happen. So of all the players that have gone to Saudi and all the reasons that they have gone to Saudi, I think from a Portugal perspective, the most positive one is João Felix, because he's simply playing.
Yeah, and João Cancelo did the Diego Jota celebration. Obviously, they were commemorating Jota and his brother, who died so recently. Andy, I think the World Cup, and forgive me if you're listening in France, Germany, England, Brazil, Argentina, I think the World Cup's wide open. A mixture of the strangeness of the football environment in the United States, and no absolutely outstanding team. Spain will probably be doing their, not me saying this. Can Portugal win the World Cup, Andy? Because player for player, they are tremendous. And while I might still, I've got to stop saying Cristiano Ronaldo is a kind of a drag on the team, because he's not, because he scores 2 goals every 3 games, Can Portugal win the World Cup?
I guess I think they can. I mean, obviously there's the question of, do they go back to Euro 24, and Roberto Martinez feels he has to play Cristiano Ronaldo in every single game. I think there are 2 big advantages, I think, for Portugal going into this World Cup. Firstly, and it's what we talked about, some of those key players being in Saudi. Now, look, I know the players who play in Saudi defend it to the hilt, and they say, people don't understand what a good league it is and all that sort of stuff. The reality is the intensity is not as high as the biggest European leagues. Take you back to what we were talking about 15 minutes ago, Danny.
About France, of course.
That some of those players are going to be absolutely knackered by the time they turn up at the World Cup. What sort of shape will France be in? It's something that Didier Deschamps sort of said, can we play at this sort of tempo and with this sort of quality when we get to the end of the season? The answer is no one knows. It's a huge advantage to have key players, I think, that maybe aren't playing at the same sort of intensity. The second thing that I think Portugal have really in their favour is the fact that we talked about players playing being the most important thing, or at least to a certain extent. João Palhinha being back and being important in the Premier League, where he was completely peripheral at Bayern, almost from A1. The Vincent Kompany never really quite took to him. There were injuries as well, of course. If Palhinha has a great season, I think that's massively important for Portugal. And you add that to players who aren't going to be completely cooked by the end of the season, I think they've got a good chance.
Yeah, of course. Let me just remind you that Germany have taken control of that game against Northern Ireland. But there is something good happening for Northern Ireland, because with 3 minutes to go of normal time in Luxembourg, Slovakia, who would be the team that I imagine further down the line will be competing for the playoff place with Northern Ireland, they are drawing 0-0 with Luxembourg now. I'm tempting fate here on behalf of the Irish team, aren't I? But at the moment, with 2 minutes of normal time to go, it's Luxembourg 0, Slovakia 0. Meanwhile, here on Trans-Europe Express, we'll be getting stuck into two more European sides. One a giant who are underachieving, one a sort of hopeful World Cup winner over the past 12 years, but no longer perhaps in people's minds. Let's talk about Italy and Belgium. Sulky indeed, but now 3-1 up against Northern Ireland. They're rather smiling and enjoying the latter stages of the game. Let's find out how it is going and unfolding with Ian Abrahams.
Yeah, 4 minutes to go. Germany 3, Northern Ireland 1. Those goals in 3 minutes. First of all, Amiri and then Florian Wirtz's free kick have put this game to bed. But Northern Ireland will take so much out of it, Danny, because they had a real go at Germany tonight. Germany had come into this having lost their last 3 games. Well, they were absolutely on the back foot for times after Northern Ireland equalised. But they're going to win this game now. But they have lost, of course, their opening game in Slovakia. And it does mean that qualification, well, probably will be theirs. But Northern Ireland have an opportunity, as you were saying, against Slovakia, if they can get points out of those 2 games, to qualify themselves. 3 minutes to go in Cologne. Germany 3, Northern Ireland 1.
The thing I was saying, I should have kept my trap shut, because in the 90th minute, Rigo has got a goal for Slovakia in Luxembourg. It's Luxembourg 0, Slovakia 1 there as they head into a couple of minutes of added on time, and that is a result that Northern Ireland did not need. That when that was 0-0 after the full 90 minutes, and that looked like a great result for Northern Ireland. But there you are, currently Germany 3, Northern Ireland 1, and Luxembourg 0, Slovakia 1 in Group A of the World Cup qualifiers. I see Bulgaria getting a good hammering in Georgia as well. Andy, let's talk about Italy. Gennaro Gattuso's first game in charge. After an hour, it was 0-0 against Estonia. Of course, much more used to being a big wig in the world of basketball. But it all turned out very well in the end for Italy.
Yeah, it did. They got there in the end. They won 5-0. And what I liked is when they got through nearly an hour without scoring, they didn't panic at any stage. And given what's happened to Italy, especially in World Cup qualifiers in the last couple of terms, so if you think, it bears repeating this, even though everyone knows it. If they didn't qualify for this World Cup, it would be the third successive time that Italy didn't qualify for the World Cup. It's already wild that they didn't qualify for 2 World Cups in a row. 3 would be beyond the pale. And I think that's why they reacted so swiftly to get rid of Luciano Spalletti, who obviously has a lot of respect in the game.
Sure.
And you know, Gattuso is the nuclear option. There's no way around that. I think it was quite interesting. Moise Kean, who opened the scoring, who's very, very good. Interesting partnership between him and Matteo Retegui, who, of course, recently left Atalanta for Saudi and was back at the Gewiss Stadium, playing there for the first time since he left Atalanta in this, and he got a great reception. Ken said afterwards, the thing about Gattuso is he's very clear. And I was like, yeah, I suppose that is one way of describing him. He's very clear. But, you know,
he's not liable to overcomplicate the issue, is he?
No. But this is the nowhere else to go option, really. You know, what do Italy do if Gattuso doesn't work out? I realise he wouldn't have been everyone's first choice, but it feels a choice dictated kind of by desperation, because remember, it didn't go quite as well as he hoped last season at Hajduk Split. That's Hajduk Split, not anyone out of the big 5 European leagues.
No.
And he ends up with the Italy job, which is really unthinkable. I think it was unthinkable probably even 6 months ago, if we look at it realistically. But even if it was only Estonia, this was such a convincing display. Italy were dogged, they were perseverant, and they also played really exciting football. I can't think of a player where I came away thinking, yeah, they could have done a bit better there. Tonali was brilliant in midfield. I think he has become their best midfield player now. Like I said, the link between Ken and Retegui is very good too. And bearing in mind, they're going to Israel tomorrow night. Well, they're not going to Israel. They're going to Debrecen in Hungary, where they're playing the game. And that's been the source of quite some controversy in Italy, as you might be able to imagine.
Sure.
But they feel in a good place for the first time in a while. Really impressive, and it's no exaggeration to say they could have won 10 or 15-0. They had
40 shots, like it was a basketball
40.
match.
Like there shouldn't be time in the game for that, really, should there?
No, they shouldn't. Andy, I've watched, let me just check my figures here. I've watched 2.5 million football matches in my lifetime. And yet you all see something you've never seen before. Tell us why this game was delayed.
Well, it was stopped in the first couple of minutes because there was a mobile phone on the pitch. And the only reason that the mobile phone was spotted is because it rang when the referee was jogging past it. It appeared it's fallen out of the pocket of one of the ground staff. And, then it was obviously picked up, removed, after presumably they'd answered and said he'll call you back or she will call you back. But it was an interesting sort of international window for stoppages in the European qualifiers, with Austria and Cyprus being stopped for a number of minutes when a huge hole developed in the pitch. I'm not talking about Wimbledon at Plough Lane quite last year.
No.
But like a sort of like fairly large hole, the sort that you could definitely like drop your leg in and twist an ankle.
Break an ankle, yeah, of course.
Yeah, that was filled and fixed as
in
best
the interests of fairness. Then, if those two events, a mobile phone stopping the match, and a hole in the pitch stopping a match, if they'd been in South America, I'd been laughing now. But these are happening in European World Cup qualifiers. So when we talk about the disorganised carousel of international football, don't think that Europe is immune in any way, shape, or form.
True globalisation, Danny.
Properly, yeah. Meanwhile, Belgium went to won in Liechtenstein by 6-0. It was an important win for Belgium. I know what you're going to think, Liechtenstein 6-0, all the rest of it, because the manager, Rudy Garcia, had taken the decision to take the captaincy off of their legendary midfielder, Kevin De Bruyne. So if he had done that and things had gone badly, there would have been a lot of tutting and eye-rolling, but that's not what happened.
No, and they say there are no easy games in international football. Well, this was definitely an easy one. And of course, Belgium are in a strange place at the moment, between some very experienced players and some very new ones. To that end, Malik Fofana of Lyon, he scored his first goal for the first team, the sixth right at the end. But the more important goals were the ones earlier on, and particularly the two by Yuri Tielemans, who has been given the captaincy of Belgium. Now, Kevin De Bruyne himself actually scored in this game. Of course, he's still a relevant player, has moved to Napoli this summer and is hoping to be a big part of some big things for them. But I think what worked really well for Garcia is how De Bruyne reacted to this. Now, if we go back a little while and remember what happened when Thibaut Courtois didn't get the captaincy on the occasion of his 100th cap and massively fell out with Domenico Tedesco and refused to play for the team. And that was something that really hung as a huge cloud over Belgian football and the Belgian national team for a while. It seems that Garcia is maybe not the greatest coach in the world, but certainly a much better communicator, because De Bruyne was asked about it and he came out and said, well, look, this is a long-term decision. The reality is Tielemans is going to play for longer than me. So if we're going to have some sort of continuity and consistency, him being the captain actually makes sense. Now, I guess the unsaid part of this is what would happen if Romelu Lukaku was fit, because he is the other really experienced player. And, you know, obviously Hans Vanaken is older, but I think if we're talking about in terms of actual matches played for Belgium and stature in the game, Lukaku's the one apart from De Bruyne and Courtois. So he's been passed over for it as well. Now, of course, there is the possibility that Garcia for the next game, or, well, it would be a game next year, wouldn't it now? Because Lukaku's not going to play again before 2026, as we know. So who gets picked as Belgium captain in March, I think is pretty interesting. But, of course, Tielemans is a player who's become a Villa regular, who's become more and more important, who smashed it in the Champions League last season. So in terms of consistency, it'd be interesting to see if Lukaku falls in line the way De Bruyne has. Yeah,
if Lukaku's fit, do they try and fit him and Lois Openda into the team now, or is Lukaku still very much first choice and Lois will have to wait for his chance?
Well, I think they should. Of course, Lois Openda started this, and Lois Openda's had a big move this week. So how he does at Juventus, I think, will govern this to a point. Look, Lois Openda is going to have the chance for the October and November international matches. That's something that can make a real difference. And of course, where Lukaku's career goes next will be really interesting, because he's penciled in for a return to Anderlecht at some point. Now, whether that's at the end of this season or the end of next season, we'll have to wait and see. I would say, without writing him off in any way, shape or form, we are past peak Lukaku now. I think that's where we are. Bear in mind, he's been a pro since he was 16, so he's had quite a long career already, and obviously he's done some great things in the game. So I do think there is an opportunity for Openda here. But I think when you look at the best parts of the rest of the Belgium team, the fact that you have two such talented wide players and such young wide players as Doku and Fofana will leave Lyon and end up playing for a Champions League club next season. I think that lends itself more to a front three than a 4-4-2, personally.
Yeah, thank you, Andy, for all of that. The game is over in Cologne at the Rhine Energy Stadion. The match between Germany and Northern Ireland has come to an end. Let's get a full-time report from Ian Abrahams.
And it finished Germany 3, Northern Ireland 1. The Germans ahead inside 6 minutes. Serge Gnabry putting them in front. But Northern Ireland went toe-to-toe for the next 65 minutes and equalised just after the half-hour mark. Justin Devaney corner, brilliantly volleyed in at the far post by Isaac Price of West Bromwich Albion for his 10th international goal. But then 2 goals in 3 minutes settled the game for Germany. The first on 69, Nadim Imeri put in the ball basically into an empty net after it was played in from the left-hand side. And then 3 minutes later, Germany won a free kick, 25 yards out left of centre, and Liverpool's Florian Wirtz stepped up and brilliantly converted it beyond Bailey Peacock-Farrell, who was playing his 50th game for his country. A brilliant performance by Ireland in defeat, and a welcome win at last for Nagelsmann's side. It finished Germany 3, Northern Ireland 1.
Thank you very much, Ian. And in the next section here on Trans Europe Express, we'll look at how Germany are getting on, because that's a huge win for them after their beating and really terrible performance against Slovakia during the week. And we'll turn back again to that match in Turkey, where Turkey are being given an absolute spanking by Spain tonight. I'm not sure their manager can actually survive that. We'll talk about both those countries next here on Trans Europe Express. Yeah, welcome back, everybody, to Trans-Europe Express. Andy Brassell's with me, Danny Kelly. Andy, I was just laughing a little bit because now, of course, the NFL is back. Massive coverage over on talkSPORT too, including a live game right now. But the season started, and after 6 minutes, had a huge controversy. The Philadelphia Eagles, who won the Super Bowl in the spring, were playing. They were playing the Dallas Cowboys, the sort of Manchester United of American football. And Philadelphia's best defensive player, arguably their best player full stop, decided a good way to start the season would be to spit on Dak Prescott, the fabled quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys. And he was ejected from the game. And normally, in American football, the red card is very rare. You have to bring a machete onto the pitch and use it to get thrown out of the game. But he was gone, Jaden, within 6 seconds of the start of the season. I don't know what goes into people's minds. I really, really don't. He has been suitably apologetic. And as I say, you can listen to American football, if that's your thing, over on talkSPORT 2 right now. Throughout the season, massive coverage of that sport, which Andy knows I love, here on talkSPORT. Let's return then, Andy, to the games just finished there in Cologne. Germany 3, Northern Ireland 1. Very, very important victory for Julian Nagelsmann following that 2-0 defeat in Slovakia, which was a horror show.
Yeah, I mean, they desperately needed that. And after the game in Bratislava, the result was poor. Of course, they lost 2-0, Germany. The performance was maybe even worse. And Nagelsmann completely lost his rag for the first time I can remember, really, certainly in charge of Germany. And
it was a brilliant post-match speech. I loved it.
It was. Well, he said afterwards, didn't he, Danny, that maybe we need to call up some players with less talent who are going to work a bit harder. I don't think I've ever heard a coach say that before, certainly not at an international level. And given that he's got this reputation for being holistic and skateboarding into training and all this sort of stuff, it's remarkable, really, to hear him come out with that. But I guess that's what the Germany job does to you. Now, there's been a lot of pressure on him in the days since that as well, because I think we've had this feeling that, of course, he did take over the team in quite a low ebb. He was almost a ringer, an emergency choice. You know, I don't think anyone thought he was going to stick with it long term, but there was enough good stuff that happened in Euro 2024 after he succeeded the sacked Hansi Flick that he thought he'll stay on until the World Cup in 2026 at least. And progress hasn't been a straight line since then. And I think it's been very, very frustrating for people. Now, I think Nick Woltemade, actually, his performance against Northern Ireland tonight was quite a good example of that, in that there are a few moments where you think, oh, yeah, okay, I can see what they're trying to do here. But it's quite a disappointing Woltemade performance, I think, given that not only is he just moved for 90 million euros or near 90 million euros, but he's expected to be the centre-forward who succeeds in the Premier League and then leads Germany into the World Cup in 2026. I think it's almost where Germany are in microcosm. So when Northern Ireland equalised, they were really under the pump. It's quite interesting because when you think of Hansi Flick was almost like marched out of the building, you know, like a sacked merchant banker, the fact that when they lost 4-1 to Germany to Japan in Wolfsburg, like he was gone before the team had got up for breakfast the next morning in the hotel in Wolfsburg. And, you know, there are many things in life that are probably not great, like, you know, waking up in a hotel in Wolfsburg. To wake up in a hotel in Wolfsburg and find your manager's been binned while you're having your scrambled eggs is not the greatest feeling, I imagine.
The thing is, Andy, look, the only national coach Germany have ever sacked was poor old Hansi Flick.
Yes.
Hansi Flick's record, compared to Julian Nagelsmann's as it stands now, is almost identical.
Almost identical after 25 games, which is remarkable. This was a 13th win for Nagelsmann as opposed to 2 for Hansi Flick, to 12 for Hansi Flick, but almost exactly the same before tonight. So look, there's a lot of work to do. It was interesting, I thought, that they improved once they brought on Maxi Bayer, who of course Dortmund were thinking of selling in this transfer window. Brentford were very, very keen. Him, and the story, as Moose was alluding to with the second goal, is really Nadim Amiri. Now, bear in mind, until he got recalled earlier in the season off the back of a brilliant season for Mainz, he'd been a young star at Leverkusen, lost his way a bit, had a couple of loans, like went to Italy, didn't really work out. But then he went to Mainz, got close to getting them in the Champions League last season, got recalled after 5 years out. And to still be in your 20s and be out of the national team for 5 years, well, basically you've been retired, haven't you? And when the ball came in from the left tonight from David Raum, it just got past Bayer, who was stretching and couldn't get it. And as the Moose was saying, it was walked in at the back post by Amiri. You just see the sheer joy. It's one of those things that you love to see in international football, isn't it? Especially with all the tension that surrounded Germany recently, to have someone who's like, I'm so glad to be here, even if it's difficult at the moment. And, you know, this could be my moment. And to grab that moment, for me, it's an even bigger moment than the Florian Wirtz goal, even though, of course, that was a brilliant, brilliant free kick.
Meanwhile, Andy, and I know how closely you follow football in Turkey 0, Spain 6. Which is more likely, Spain to win the World Cup or Vincent Montella to get the sack in the next 10 days?
Well, I don't know. I think I might have an each way on both, to be honest. I mean, it's going to be hard. But Montella is enormously liked and respected.
Sure.
In Turkey, but I think he will struggle to survive this. I mean, it's just such a humiliation. All I would say is there were obviously strong Brazil 1, Germany 7 vibes in this, especially in the fact that the Turkish kept making the same defensive mistakes again and again and again, and they were leaving themselves open to be smashed on the break in that second half in particular. But Spain were absolutely irresistible. Lamine Yamal had a brilliant game, and this is a game in which Mikel Merino scored a hat-trick. I think he was man of the match. Yamal was absolutely unreal. And we'll talk, I suppose, a bit more about his Ballon d'Or candidacy, especially as everyone's talking about it at the moment, especially as Ousmane Dembele's done his hamstring this weekend. But, you know, if you go back... I was going to say, if you go back to the 2013 Ballon d'Or, which was the last one, I think it's quite similar to the situation with PSG, because Bayern were a team that was such an incredible collective that the vote was almost split between their great players. So, of course, Franck Ribéry was thought of as the favourite for the Ballon d'Or, campaigned pretty hard for himself. And then Cristiano Ronaldo went and scored that hat-trick in the World Cup qualifying playoff in Sweden. And after the vote was extended, all a bit shady, like it was all over. And it was Ronaldo's all over again. I wonder, like, I want to see the next couple of weeks of Lamine Yamal and see what happens here. And maybe we're going to get a similar thing.
I'm wondering, and it's a ridiculous thing to put on a teenager's shoulders, whether he's now replacing Messi as the engine. Spain are a better team than Argentina, but Messi carried Argentina to these 2 South American championships and the World Cup. Is he already that player who will be the difference between 6 or 7 very, very good, but none of them outstanding teams when we get to the United States, Mexico and Canada? I mean, it's looking like that.
Yeah, I don't think that's an unreasonable question at all, Danny. And, you know, we've been talking about collectiveness, whether we're talking about Bayern in 2013, whether we're talking about PSG this year, whether we're talking about Spain, because I have never had the feeling with Spain watching, like, indisputably the best team in the world. I had that feeling tonight, I think, for the first time ever. And Yamal is a huge, huge part of that, because we talked about like Germany humiliating Brazil like that, and then you think of the Spanish doing that to the Turkish on their own patch. Spain was so much better tonight than Germany were in that World Cup semi-final. I know it was a World Cup semi-final, but still, it was an incredible performance by Spain.
Can I just say, and Rodri was on the bench. Can I just say that for those of you who are thinking about backing Spain, they've got weapons still to come. I really am struggling to believe that the progress that Lamine Yamal is making. He was obviously a player bordering on genius when he's a teenager, but teenagers drift away sometimes. And, you know, he's playing a lot of football and all the rest of it, but he just seems to answer every question that's put in front of him.
Yeah, and I think when you bear in mind that, like, the intense pressure on him, what he's had to get used to off the pitch, the fact that I feel he's quite often rubbished by a certain section of Spanish society for being working class as well. And he's had to put up with all that. And he's still, you know, doing messages for Uber drivers' kids and just being normal and just making football look like it's a load of fun.
Yeah, he won't be getting any grief from me for being working class, I can assure you. Listen, Andy, that first hour has absolutely flown by. Thank you all for listening. We'll be back in a few minutes' time when we're bringing you Mbappé Watch, all the latest from Spain and Italy, particularly the last few minutes of the transfer windows in those countries, and France. That's all coming up in the second hour of tonight's edition of Trans Europe Express. We're delighted to have you along for the ride.
Tyson Fury, Floyd Mayweather, Canelo Alvarez. Just hearing these names makes you think money and the hundreds of millions of dollars, pounds or Saudi riyals in boxing. But that's at the top. At the bottom, it isn't quite the same. Even for those on the rise, there's not an awful lot of cash in the boxing world. And if you're just starting out, well, it can be a very costly exercise indeed. But don't take my word for it. Here's the former European champion, talkSPORT's Spencer Oliver.
You're turning professional and you're boxing, let's say, York Hall on a non-televised fight. You have to sell tickets to earn any money, but you have to cover the wages of your opponent as well. So if you don't have the ability to be able to sell enough tickets, you effectively have to pay to fight.
A far cry then from Jake Paul facing Mike Tyson in 2024, when the purse was reported to be around £48 million. But the vast amounts of cash lining the top dog's pockets isn't the norm in a typical fight.
Let's say you're lucky and you get between 5 and 10 grand. You're going to get 10 grand max for that. 10% goes to the trainer, 25% goes to the manager. Then we've got the tax man to pay as well. So we're cutting that money in at least half. So now you've got 5 grand for a 10-week camp. So you're talking about a guy here earning, he might be clearing 500 quid a week. How do you support a family on that? So boxers chase the dream. And, you know, there's probably 2% of them that actually make it.
So say you do make it and you start to rise up the ranks. Strikers Boxing, a training academy, says the mid-tier fighters can earn more, somewhere between £10,000 and £50,000 a fight, depending on record, profile, opponent and popularity of weight class. It's only at the top level does the real cash start flowing in, with the top-tier professionals, i.e. those going for titles, earning six figures a fight. Something else you'll have heard of is the terms prize fighter or journeyman. A prize fighter is, as it sounds, someone who picks up fights where they can and gets a nice big check if they win. Journeymen are the fighters who take on up-and-comers, effectively used for experience in the ring. Even if they're going up against the real prospects, a young Anthony Joshua, for example, these guys will be lucky to earn more than 10 grand. So the average boxer isn't as rich as you'd think.
Yeah, welcome back to the second hour of 3 of tonight's edition of Trans Europe Express. I'm Danny Kelly. Alongside me, as always, Andy Brassell. In the next 60 minutes, we'll be talking about the goings-on in Spain, Italy and France. Not international level, but at club level. There's been no games, of course, but the transfer window in all those countries led to an absolute deluge of late activity for some of their biggest clubs. We'll get stuck into all of that because that's what we're going to do. I'll also keep you across the men's final in the Arthur Ashe Arena. One of the great, I'm not a tennis fan, but the arena itself is just one of the great sporting cathedrals. And Yannick Sinner is 2-1 down at the moment to Carlos Alcaraz, his great rival. Welcome back to Trans Europe Express, where it's now time for this.
Carrière, le Paris Saint-Germain, Mbappé! Mbappé! Little give and go, Mbappé's in! Oh, shoots two! He scored twice in 2 minutes! Tête de Kylian Mbappé. Allez, Kylian!
And I guess it's fair to say that we were a little bit surprised, though we knew it was going to happen, when Memphis Depay was able to announce himself as the leading goal scorer for the Netherlands in international football of all time. Kylian Mbappé is not yet France's leading goal scorer, but man, is it an inevitability.
Yeah, it absolutely is. So he's drawn level with the great Thierry Henry, 51 goals for France now, which means he's 6 behind Olivier Giroud's on 57, with all the time in the world to beat him. And I think when we do the comparison between Henry and Mbappe, straight away we have to say he's done it in 29 matches quicker, which is incredible, pretty amazing. Yeah. Which is really something. It's an amazing achievement, and especially when you think of what I guess personal and image battering Mbappe has taken over the last couple of years, both for staying at PSG, for the way that he left PSG, and that first year at Real Madrid where people asked about the tactical fit, and not a lot went right for the team as a whole. So he started this season as if he's really, really ready to have a proper go at things. Now, bear in mind that his Club World Cup was not only unsuccessful in that they got knocked out and they weren't very good by his old team, of course, but the fact that he wasn't at the races because he'd had really severe food poisoning, was really unwell. But the determination on him this season is pretty clear. He was excellent in Lublin against and
as well as that,
against
Andy,
Ukraine.
We talked about the amount of football players have been asked to play, and you talked about his illness. I don't know what his pre-season was like. He's probably had none, like so many of these top French players. But to me, and I'm not a doctor, he looks lean. He looks fully fit. He looks trim. He looks fluid in his movements. And I couldn't really say that for much of last season.
Yeah, I mean, the numbers look great from last season. And I think for a first season at Real Madrid, I mean, what more do you want? The answer being trophies. Yeah, exactly. The start of the season was not great. And like I've said before, I don't think Carlo Ancelotti handled the whole situation brilliantly, especially with the shifting penalty taker business between Vinicius Junior, between Jude Bellingham, between Mbappé. Look, whether Mbappé takes the pens or not, the fact that the penalty takers were shifting led to this Spanish media narrative that he was ducking the pressure penalties, which was ridiculous. It was nothing to do with him. It was just a rotating taker. And for someone who's so politically adept, I don't think Ancelotti handled that particularly well. But yeah, I think what happened was sort of despite the situation at Real Madrid rather than because of it in a lot of that. But of course, I think there's a lot going on at Real Madrid, as there always is for any player, that he won't have any influence over. Now, he was asked the other day and he said, well, look, we're favourites for the Champions League. He hasn't tried to duck it or anything like that. And I think you have to be like that best foot forward. But he's looking like he's trying to will France into that sort of zone as well. And I thought France looked energetic. They look fluent. He was a part of that. His goal was fantastic. His movement was fantastic. But I thought it was a really interesting thing in terms of what Real Madrid could do better and what Mbappé could do better at Real Madrid when you talked about the eye test, is the way that France pressed in Wrocław was really, really interesting. Now, as I said before, Didier Deschamps said, look, we can't do that for the whole game. And of course, they can't do that for the whole game. There was a bit where they sort of backed off a little bit and then Ukraine got into the game a little bit more. But it shows all that stuff that people said, and especially directly after PSG won the Champions League. And, a load of people turned around and said, oh, it turned out Mbappé was the problem. His ego, his not doing stuff off the ball. Well, he can do it. A bit like Vinicius Junior. He was criticised for not pressing off the ball last season, and he didn't for a lot of the time. But funnily enough, we've talked about it before, haven't we? The fact that Roberto De Zerbi, Marseille, when he's not been happy with Mason Greenwood's efforts off the ball, he's shown him videos of Vinicius Junior. So we know he can do it. He said to him, look, this is what a star player is meant to do off the ball. You can be a star player and actually not be a liability when we're out of possession. And I think for Mbappé to relearn to do that, obviously, as you said, Danny, him being in peak physical condition is a huge part of that. But if they can get him in that sort of position, it will be hugely important for Real Madrid as well as for France.
And France, as you say, winners of the World Cup 2 tournaments ago, winners of the World Cup more recently, except for Kolo Muani's miss and Emi Martinez's save. I mean, legendary World Cup moment, obviously. Didier Deschamps continues his merry way, but we see they have yet another crop of brilliant players to back up Mbappé and others. And we saw with Paris Saint-Germain, though there were as many great Portuguese players as there were French players in that team. Sometimes I think they haven't refreshed it because they've left Didier Deschamps in there. But because his record is so good, Andy, why would they change it? Where do you see them, and I'll be asking this a lot in the next 9 months, where do you see them come the World Cup in the summer?
They're close. They're close. And as you've said a number of times, and I think you're absolutely right, it's a really open tournament. There's no doubt about that. But I think, and Deschamps, he's seen it all before. So, as I said, he said after the game that, look, it's not really about how we are now. It's, are we able to replicate these sort of efforts when the players have played a full season? And certainly in terms of pressing, he said the key with pressing is freshness. And I think that puts the Mbappe and to an extent Vinicius debate about what they do off the ball into some sort of perspective. And it goes back to what we were talking about right at the top of the show. The fact is, it's always looked upon, because so many of us would like to be top footballers, it's always looked upon as desire. But sometimes it's not desire, it's what you have in the tank or not, isn't it? And when you're knackered, it looks like you don't really care, but actually you've got nothing more to give. So I think the way that players spare their efforts, it's a bit like people talk about, LeBron James and his regular season defense because he saves it all for the playoffs. I think the players are going to have to govern themselves a little bit better. And Mbappé is someone who's talked about that a lot. We know he's an intensely intelligent footballer. So how he does that during the season, and if he's able to put himself into a position to peak for Real Madrid in the back end of the Champions League, to peak for France in the World Cup, will be really interesting. What I do think is one of the advantages for France is that midfield. Because I think if you've got a really good Tchouaméni was excellent against Ukraine, and that made a massive difference. He's had an up and down last 18 months, and I think that's something that, because he's not a glamour player, that's sometimes a little bit overlooked. And Manu Kone next to him. And since he left Borussia Mönchengladbach and has been sort of fast-tracked into the France 11 and has played beside Tchouaméni, once you've got everyone ready, I think if you've got Tchouaméni, Manu Kone, who's been brilliant in Italy, and Adrien Rabiot, who we assume will be brilliant in Italy again, now he's signed for Milan, I think that's a pretty formidable midfield three.
I wonder, Andy, whether, and we'll talk about this more, this is just a thought for to throw into the mill pond right now, there'll be managers of national teams, even managers of national teams with a great number of gifted players who will be thinking about the amount of games they're going to play between now and the World Cup, how they will arrive at the World Cup, and they'll be thinking, I'm not going to press, not in those temperatures, I'm going to play low block and play on the break. I guarantee one or two of the teams we think of as attacking teams and managers of attacking managers, they're going to go for the traditional, non-traditional low block, because the conditions and the way they're going to arrive there are going to be so different. Let me just tell you that Carlos Alcaraz has broken the serve of Yannick Sinner. He's 2-1 up in sets, and he's now 4-2 ahead in the fourth set. And long way to go yet, but actually he only needs 2 more games. But looks like Alcaraz is going to overcome Sinner on this occasion in one of sport's great rivalries, as we see it emerging over the past year and a half. Let me also tell you that breakfast returns tomorrow morning from 6 a.m. with Jeff Stelling and Ali McCoist, and they'll be joined by a host of guests. They look back on a huge week of international football. That's breakfast with Jeff Stelling and Ali McCoist from 6 a.m. tomorrow morning. You're listening to Trans Europe Express, and next we'll tell you what happened, what's going on in Spain, particularly when, if ever, will Barcelona start playing in the newly refurbished Nou Camp. Yeah, next we're turning our eyeglass on to what's been going on in Spain. The headline for this section is Camp Yes or Camp No. Andy, last week we talked a lot about whether Barcelona were going to get into the newly refurbished, or some part of the newly refurbished new camp in time for Spanish League matches, and more importantly, I guess, for the Champions League. You seem to have the schedule sorted out, rather more than the club itself, who at the moment are threatening to play in 3 different venues.
Yeah, it's a possibility. So, look, the plan was always to be back next weekend, September 14th. They'll be playing the home game against Valencia in the Camp Nou. Now, it's become clear that that is not yet possible. So they've got the sign-off to play it in the previously known as Mini Estadi, because that's what it is. Now the Estadi Johan Cruyff holds 6,000 and Barcelona B play there. So they'll be playing there without a crowd, basically. That's the plan for next weekend. Now, the thing is, Barcelona...
Andy, hold on. They're not going to let 6,000 people in?
It doesn't look like it at the moment because basically there's too short a run for tickets. Now, this may change, of course, because things can always change with Barcelona. But there's too short of a run up to A, ticket it, and B, decide who can actually come in, because clearly there's a load of season ticket holders who would miss out, even with the fact they've been playing in Montjuic for a while. So they've got 2 more home games this month. And the question is, where will they play them? So that they have Getafe on the 21st, and they have Real Sociedad on the 28th. And this is important because, of course, they've sort of had a backloaded home schedule. They've been playing all their games away to get Camp Nou ready as quickly as possible and hopefully play all their games there. Now, look, the Real Sociedad game on the 28th is the important one, because not only are they aiming to be back in the Camp Nou for the reception of PSG, the first home game of the Champions League, which is Wednesday, October 1st, but basically UEFA not only want them to play all their league phase games in the same stadium. So if they're going to play in the Camp Nou before February, they need to be in for that gala game against PSG. But UEFA, it appears, would like them to have played a game and it to have been okay beforehand. So that means Real Sociedad on the 28th, basically. That's the one. And if they can't get back there for that, it looks like they'll be going to Montjuic, because they can't play in the Mini Estadi indefinitely, of course. They need big crowds. They need gate receipts, all that sort of good stuff. So they've got an agreement, if they need to go back to Montjuic until February, and that would probably be the timescale.
Is there a chance, Andy, that they'll move into the new camp before it's completely finished and play in front of, say, 30,000 in the Champions League?
That is the plan. So there are like 3 stages of the redevelopment, and they're coming to the end, or they've come to the end, but they need it signed off safety wise for stage 1. So basically, they need to be in there with a reduced crowd. UEFA are hoping they can get it up to 45 for Champions League matches, because of course that's another thing, without getting too much into the boring technicalities of it. There are so many extra elements for Champions League. It's quite a production when you have Champions League at your stadium, and that's why you have so many clubs. You've had clubs across Europe that haven't been able to have Champions League home games in recent years at their stadium. So Union Saint-Gilloise won't be able to do it this year. Union Berlin, when they first got into European competition, they had to play at the Olympiastadion, which was Hertha's stadium, of course. So it happens to a number of clubs because you need certain television provisions. You have for television, you need bigger advertising boards,
is huge,
all that sort of stuff. So these are the extra things that Barcelona have to think of. So personally, I'm hopeful they're into Camp Nou for Barcelona versus PSG on October 1st, because I think it would be brilliant. Realistically, I think they're there for the knockouts.
Okay, and somebody who'll be playing either in the Johan Cruyff or the Montjuic or the new camp is Marcus Rashford. Back in the England team, hasn't scored for a couple of years now, has he, for England? But Tuchel likes him. How's he gone so far from at Barcelona?
Difficult, I think. And I mean, we always said from the start, for Barcelona to commit long term on him, it would have to be something pretty special. Look, I don't think we can jump to any conclusions.
No.
After a few games, but what I'm feeling so far is what I felt at the beginning, in that he is a player that is still in the process of rebuilding himself. And we saw that at Aston Villa. Like, I desperately want him to be good. And I know there are loads of other people out there who desperately want him to be good because they like him for off-pitch.
A whole range of reasons, football, non-football reasons.
Marcus Rashford, as well as, him being a great footballer when he's at his best. Yes. But the reality is Villa didn't take the plunge, because they're in this PSR situation, but they were never going to. They couldn't really, could they? Because you can't bet the farm on a guy who has some good moments but isn't really going to carry the team. Not on that sort of money. And Barcelona, and so that's why Barcelona end up getting him, because there's a club that's not prepared to bet everything on him. And why would you? Because he's still on the way back, quite apart from the expense. But the fact is, how likely was it that he would ever be able to find the consistency of game time that he can properly rebuild himself at Barcelona? Because really, what Marcus Rashford needs is to be dropped into a team for 15 games. And it's like, right, play me every minute, or play me most minutes for 15 games. And that can never happen at Barcelona, because remember, we've talked about it quite a few times. The fact that Deco said at the beginning, the most important thing for us is not defensive reinforcements. It's not even a goalkeeper, even though they went out and got Joan Garcia and he's going to work out great for them. What we need cover to relieve Rafinha.
Cover being the operative word.
Exactly. Yeah. And there's never really been a question that they'd play him at centre forward. It's thought of that if Lewandowski can't play, Ferran Torres plays instead. A very different type of striker. But actually, as Pep Guardiola and Luis Enrique correctly identified ages ago, a very natural centre forward, even if he isn't a big bruiser.
Yeah, and that is something that Marcus isn't. He's not a natural central striker.
No,
Let me tell you that in the Arthur Ashe Stadium, Sinner has held his service. So now Carlos Alcaraz is serving for the US Open. He's 6'2", 6'6", 6'1", 5'4" up. He's got a service game here to see him as champion of the United States. Andy, that's Marcus Rashford. What's going on with Aymeric Laporte? He was all set to come back from Saudi Arabia to Bilbao, which looks like a great move for everyone concerned. Hasn't gone through. Yeah,
so Athletic thought they'd sealed the deal. They'd reached an agreement with Al Nassr. They wanted him to go. Athletic wanted to welcome him back. It would have been a huge signing for them, of course. And Laporte wanted to come back to Europe and come back to Athletic. So they thought they had all the documents sorted just about in time. They didn't. They weren't accepted by FIFA. And so Athletic appealed to FIFA last week, saying that the fault lay with Al Nassr sort of hanging on and not reacting quickly enough. FIFA didn't accept this. So now it looks like Athletic are taking it to CAS and hoping that they can get it over the line.
Not Tony Cascarino.
Maybe they could take it to him as well.
He's a very wise man, Tony. Very wise man.
Yeah, and with his French, he could have big influence in the Basque Country. I don't think there's any doubt about that, although maybe not that far south. I think it's one of those ones where you think it's a great shame, because I realise there have to be rules around transfers, but with another transfer we'll touch on a little bit later as well, the application of the absolute letter of the law, you sort of wonder, who is showing a bit of leniency harming here? I just don't get it.
Yeah, the problem is, if you are lenient in one case, they're not lenient in another. You leave yourself open to all kinds of accusations.
True.
Andy, on the final day of the transfer window in Spain, two teams who suddenly woke up and realised, oh my God, our squad is useless, and went on a kind of supermarket sweep were Girona and Seville.
Yeah, Girona really needed to. I mean, it worked out for Spurs, obviously, because Brian Hill got his permanent move back to Girona, where he flourished.
Love everything about Brian except the way he played football. Lovely hair, looks like a beetle, lovely chap to be around, I'm told. I mean, the physical demands of the Premier League just proved to be too much for him, didn't they?
Yeah, I think his inability to play for more than 25 minutes did for him, really. And you can say that in a number of different contexts. But look,
sure.
I think that they've been so poor and they've been so flat at the start of this season. Look, Michel, the coach, nailed his colours to the mast and said, "Look, help." Basically, this is what we need. Bad news for Paolo Gazzaniga, because Dominik Livakovic, who was so brilliant for Croatia at the last World Cup.
Really good goalkeeper.
Yeah, he really is. He's arrived on loan for Fenerbahce. He's not just a good goalkeeper, he's going to be a busy goalkeeper, unless things really change in a hurry. They signed another Ukrainian. They signed Vanat from Dynamo Kyiv to hopefully provide them with some goals as well. So a makeover that they really needed. And Sevilla have sort of done the same, although it depends on which way you look at it. If you look at some of the signings, you'll feel both nostalgic and excited. But you're like, oh, Alexis Sanchez is there. Oh, great.
Wow.
Oh, and he's wearing the number 10 shirt. Great. I mean, he's 100 years old, but great. And then you realise they've sold Dodi Lukebakio, their best player, to Sevilla, and you're like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
That could be a thing. Of course, they're still in the position as Barcelona were, in terms of they need to get all the players registered. So Lukebakio going, hopefully, should give them the latitude to do all of that. Poor old Odysseas Vlachodimos still waiting about to be registered, let alone given a debut.
Listen, thank you very much indeed for that. Meanwhile, in the United States, Yannick Sinner, he is a fighter, of course, has saved 2 match points against Carlos Alcaraz. It's gone to deuce in this, it would be the deciding game if Alcaraz was to win it, and it would be 3-1. But Sinner's not having it out. I'll bring you the full result, if that's what it's going to be, when we come back in a few minutes' time here on Trans Europe Express. So, do you want the chance to win £25,000 in cash plus Oasis tickets to their very last show at Wembley on the 27th of September? Well, listen up, because we're giving you the chance with our biggest competition yet. 2 lucky winners, yes, 2, will win a pair of tickets to see Oasis live at Wembley for the last time. And that's not all. Along with the tickets, one of you will walk away with a massive 25 grand in cash. Now, for all the details and how to enter, listen up right now, because you could be one of those lucky winners.
18 plus, UK excluding Northern Ireland. For a chance to win, text the word Oasis to 83338 and you're in the draw. Text costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message. You must have the bill payer's permission, or you can enter for free by calling 0330 880 338. All entries must be received by the 19th of September at 9 a.m. This is a talkSPORT limited promotion run on talkSPORT, Talk and Virgin Radio UK stations. Full terms and conditions at talksport.com.
Yeah, what a day it's been for Spanish sport. Their football team has won 6-0 in Turkey. A huge, and I think for Turkey, pretty terminal win by Spain. And in New York, Carlos Alcaraz has overcome his great rival Yannick Sinner to win the US Open in 4 sets. He wins 6-3, 3-6, 6-1, 6-4. And he looks very, very happy with himself. Why wouldn't he? Andy, let's talk about Italy next. And really a lot of activity, of course, on the last day and a half of the transfer window. Let me put this straightforward to you. Were Juventus the big winners of the window in Italy?
Well, the big winners are deadline day, Danny, because you think the 2 signings they got over the line on deadline day, Lois Openda from Leipzig, who I think could have done a great job for a number of Premier League clubs, and Edin Džigroza, a really explosive winger, who joined from Lille, who's done it in Liga, who's done it in the Champions League, who's been held up by injuries a little bit in the last sort of 6 months to a year. But again, he's worth it with a year running down on his contract. And Openda, I don't know if there was a better value striker out there, actually, because they've signed him on loan with an obligation to buy 40 million euros. So, that's about 33 million pounds. Now, he didn't have his best season last season, but he still made it into double figures in goals and assists. And that's despite, if you break down the numbers, him not having that many chances provided for him. He got a lot less shots off than he did the previous couple of seasons. And then you go back to the season before, he scores 24 in the Bundesliga alone, nearly 30 overall. Scored 21 for Lens as they finished second in Ligue 1, just a point behind Paris Saint-Germain. This is someone who at 25 has proved that he's a consistent goal scorer in European football. And he's someone who creates as well. His movement is great. He's super intelligent. I think it's a great deal for them. And if you look at the front part of that Juventus team, you have now Kenan Yildiz, who's running the show, who almost needs to be absolved of the responsibility of scoring loads of goals because he just pulls the strings. He's quite obviously modelled himself on Del Piero, and that is no bad thing because he's been great so far. So you add to him Openda, Jonathan David, Francisco Conceição, who's gone there permanently, and now Džigroza, who would have taken up one of the non-EU places, but, Danny, friends in high places.
Really high places. Go on, tell people. This is the sort of thing that drives supporters mad because it just shows there's all kinds of fingers in all kinds of pies at the top level of football.
Well, look, I think it's quite interesting that Džigroza, as a Kosovo international, would have counted for one of the non-EU places. But as luck would have it, the Prime Minister of Albania is a massive Juventus fan. I don't know if that's why he got a passport really quickly for Albania, so he didn't take up one of those non-EU places. But worked out pretty well. So he continues the long history of almost Albanian footballers, because clearly he's Kosovo, in Italy. The
Openda deal came about after they couldn't reach agreement, Juventus, with Paris Saint-Germain for Randall Kolo-Muani, who'd done so well for Juventus at the second half of last season. You rarely hear Nasser Al-Khelaifi, the head honcho of Paris Saint-Germain, in high dudgeon. He's a very relaxed and urbane sort of character. He was apoplectic.
He sounded like Alessandro Nesta describing Zlatan Ibrahimovic the first time he marked him. And Nesta was kind of quite unruffleable, and then he was asked what he thought of Ibrahimovic, and he just descended into a string of expletives, which I always found quite amusing. But yeah, I can understand PSG's need to drive a hard bargain for Kolo Muani, because he is a great player and I think he'll be really good for Spurs. But I think from Juventus's perspective, they've ended up with a really good deal for Openda. I would have felt far more comfortable doing that deal if I were them than paying, like, say, 60 for Kolo Muani, which I guess the complaint from the PSG point of view is they and Kolo Muani were proceeding on the basis that he was going to sign for Juventus. And that's why it turned out to be, just a bit of a scramble at the end, and him getting, a very good move in the end that he'll obviously be happy with, but not the move that he expected to make. The other thing to point out as well, Dusan Vlahovic, who's had such a brilliant start to the season, scored both of the opening 2 Serie A games for Juventus and scored the winner for Serbia this weekend. They had to play in England.
I know, and it appears to have woken up and said, "Oh yeah, I'm a professional footballer. I must have a go at that. It's nice." Now Milan, and I guess this is characteristic of their carry on over the last few years. They had a mad transfer window because they brought in forwards, they loaned forwards, they failed to sell forwards, and it looks like they're going to start with a winger, a centre forward. I mean, I just don't get it.
That's exactly what they're going to do, Danny. So they wanted to get in 2 strikers. They got in Christopher Nkunku, who, well, depending on your predilection, you might not describe him as a striker. And I don't just mean that because he hasn't played much for Chelsea, but brilliant up front in his last season at Leipzig. But of course, has played as an attacking midfielder and a wide player before. So not the number 9. They spent a load of the window trying to get rid of Santi Jimenez, offered a sort of swap with Roma, just like the Abraham Salamakers one they did last year for Artem Dovbyk. That didn't happen in the end. But so Santi Jimenez is still there. And Max Allegri, it appears, when Rafael Leao comes back from injury, he tried him as a centre-forward pre-season. So he's going to use Leao, who's a wide player, as a centre-forward again. So it's quite interesting imagining how Milan are probably going to line up. Of course, we talked about the aforementioned Rabiot. Presumably, he'll do what he did at Marseille, although the last time he tried to break up a dispute, it did end up quite badly. And the less said about that, the better after that opening game of the season for them at Rennes. But I think there's a couple of possibilities. So that they play Leao and Nkunku in a 2, that Nkunku is given a bit of liberty by playing off him. What they do with Santi Jimenez, if they just use him off the bench, if they end up damping him in January, really, who knows? It's quite deeply confusing. And then after the closure of the transfer window, you got an extra weird transfer out of Milan with Ismail Benacer, who was great for them once upon a time and who's pretty good on loan at Marseille last season, ended up signing for Dinamo Zagreb.
I know. What about, we heard earlier on from Matt Hutchinson in the news that Andre Onana is out of Manchester United, at least temporarily. Another person who's made their escape from Sir Jim Ratcliffe's clutches is Rasmus Højlund. How do you think he'll get on at Napoli, Andy?
I'm hopeful for him. I think, look, he will. All the stuff that he did that was unappreciated at Manchester United, like the hard work, is something that Antonio Conte will absolutely love from him. Look, there were moments where Højlund looked nowhere near the level at United. I think that's pretty clear. He's not the only Manchester United player who's been in that boat, by the way.
But he also lacked service, Andy, in a dysfunctional team, to be fair to him.
He did, and it eventually crushed his confidence. Now, look, we'd be lying, as we watch Napoli most weeks, to say that they are an open, exciting team. That would be false. However, I think there's a reason that McTominay got involved in the recruitment process, because he knows that Højlund will work super hard for the team. And that's exactly what Conte wants. Conte has gone and got him for a reason, and he's gone and got various Premier League players for a reason. And, you know, you look at McTominay shining, but not just him. You look at Lukaku before him. You look at Zambo Anguissa. You look at Billy Gilmour, who does a great job when he comes in. Look, it's a great place for him to rebuild his confidence, and he's joining a really good team as well.
Yeah, I'll be really interested to see how he gets on. I never look. You're right. He didn't reach the standards required for the Premier League, but equally, I always thought he was not. He was in a team that was so clunky, Manchester United, over the last couple of years. What chance do forward players have now? Of course, they've tried to address the problem by bringing in a whole lot of forward players to almost cut out their terrible legless midfield, if that's the correct expression. Listen,
legless.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much indeed for that. When we come back, we'll be looking at the last day of the transfer window in France. Needless to say, Marseille, who are always manic, were at it again. I'm not sure why that heavy monster sound should lead us into football in France, Andy, but that's exactly what it does. And again, the transfer window, always, I mean, it's great fun once you get to the last day. I'd do away with it completely myself, but, you know, that may just be an old geezer shouting at clouds. But let's start with the headline, Manic Marseille, because Why do clubs leave it at the last minute? I'm sure they've got their reasons. Marseille had an astonishing last 24 hours of the transfer window in France.
In fairness, they were busy for the rest of the window as well, so they did have a bit of a trolley dash, having already filled the car once and maybe a trailer on the side.
A roof rack.
Yeah, and that too, and maybe Mum's car as well, because I was just looking up the exact number. Since in 5 years of Pablo Longoria as president, they've had 157 transfers in and out, which is quite an effort, really, isn't it?
It's astonishing.
And, it was no less busy this window. So the ones that got done within 24 hours of the transfer deadline were Naef Agar, Matt O'Reilly, of course, both of those coming from the Premier League. So we're looking at not cheap here. Benjamin Pavard, a French international who, of course, came from Inter as well. And you add on to that Emerson Palmieri, Arthur Vermeeren. I don't think I've missed any of the deadline ones.
Egan Riley.
Yeah, he wasn't the deadline day one.
Okay.
He got sent off for Marseille the day before deadline day. Of course, one of five starting in that game.
And I guess the big out was Adrien Rabiot. We shouldn't forget that. He had the row. Everyone thought they would fix it. It didn't happen. Yeah,
that's right. You think their biggest signing of the window, Igor Paschal from Feyenoord, hasn't been fit to play yet, which was the reason that Rose started the season and ended up in that scrap away at Rennes that we talked about earlier with Rabiot. So, I mean, look, it's exciting, but on the other hand, it creates an enormous pressure when it's a very combustible club anyway. I think one of the big issues with the Longoria spell in charge is I do think he is a president who has the best interests of the club at heart. But having said that, because he comes from a sporting director, player trading background, it's like transfers are the answer to everything. And you know what? They're not. Sometimes you just have to stand pat. You have to let it work. You know, I don't think you can see a crack in the wall of your house, put some polyfiller in it, and then 20 seconds later go, it's still wet, let's put another layer on. In fact, let's knock down the wall and put up a new wall. You can't do that. And so I just think it's hard to look. They've got a massive squad all of a sudden. They've also got a bit of an issue in that most of the transfer windows have closed. But you've still got guys like Amin Ari, Ruben Blanco, Neil Maupay, who they don't want anymore, hanging around, who they were forced to buy permanently this summer. And you just think, like what are they going to do with some of those players? Obviously, they have the concept of the loft in France, where very much like poor Emu, they stick them up top and leave them to rot. You know, you've seen Chancellor Mbemba just signed for Lille after a year of literally doing nothing at Marseille, having been a Champions League player just before that, as well as an important player for his country.
That's noises in the loft. That's pigeons in the loft there, Andy.
Is it?
Yeah. Let's move on then, because you could talk about Marseille for the next 20 minutes, but we haven't got time for that. Yeah. Let's move on then to Lyon. We talked last week about the rather sad sight of the legendary Lyon player Mikitadze watching his team play, knowing that he was on his way out. But of course, they didn't sign a centre forward to replace him.
They signed a forward player, Martin Satriano, the Uruguayan who used to belong to Inter, erstwhile wonder kid who has come over from Lens, where he suffered a serious injury soon after signing for them, and now is not really wanted. He was there at the Marseille game last week, so we knew he would be signing already. Mathieu Louis-Jean, formerly of Nottingham Forest, who was of course the sporting director at Lyon now, he stood there and said, "Yeah, we'll get a striker on the final day." Did they? No, they didn't. On one hand, it looks kind of disastrous because, of course, they lost Lacazette, they lost Mikitadze. On top of that, of course, they lost the supply of goals in Cherki, and Thiago Almada, of course, great creator, went to Atletico Madrid. On the other hand, the market is still open in two senses, of course. Free agents could go there. And funnily enough, Michail Antonio has been linked with Lyon in the last couple of days, which is quite interesting. Also, you have something called a joker in France, where you can buy a French-registered player, so a player from Ligue 1 or Ligue 2, one player outside the window. It doesn't need to be for injury. So you can get a medical joker as well. So if you get a player that is a goalkeeper that's severely incapacitated, or you get a severe injury to a player who's a French international, or a player should die, then you get to replace them. But also, quite apart from that, you can just buy one player out the window, and there doesn't have to be a reason, which is quite interesting. Although obviously Lyon are trying to not spend money. What is the interesting thing as well is we talked about how many Englishmen were involved in that Olympico last weekend between Lyon and Marseille. 2 on the Lyon side, 3 on the Marseille side. Well, there could be a 6th the next time they play, because young Alejandro Gomez Rodriguez, who went through the academies at Chelsea and Southampton and signed for Lyon as a 16-year-old, still only 17 now, England under-17 player. He wrote, just quite prophetically, he might have known that Mathieu Louis-Jean was going to whiff in the last couple of days, because just after the Olympico, he wrote on his social media, "My time will come," in French. And you know what? It really might now, because he's one of the only options. And he looked pretty good in pre-season. He scored against Bayern in a friendly.
And Andy, in a move as shameless as Ben Chilwell's transfer from Chelsea to Strasbourg, we saw the aforementioned Presnel Kimpembe, of course, a legend at PSG, been there a long time, youth product, fan favourite, all the rest of it. He has also been given a quite shameless gold watch when he's moved to Qatar. Yeah,
that's right. He's gone to Qatar SC after having been at PSG for 20 years, if you count when he first joined the academy at 10 years old. Look, I think there's been so much talk about the identity of PSG, and, you know, Kylian Mbappé, we were talking about it before, he talked about how they needed to become more French in his last year or two at the club, and, you know, lean on those youth products from Paris. Well, this was a guy who, in the Qatar era, managed to get into the first team and be good enough to stay there. Now, of course, this was all derailed by the fact that he had this serious Achilles tendon injury.
Yes.
And obviously, by the time that he had recovered, Luis Enrique had taken charge. And even though there's a lot of love and affection for Kimpembe at the club, there was never a sense of he was going to get him back in the team, presumably because it was so physically demanding that a guy who's come off a serious injury like that, it's quite difficult to reintegrate him, particularly into the defence and a risk-taking defence. I mean, I tend to think he still could have done a job for a European club, but no one was really prepared to take that chance, especially on those wages, because he'd been there for so long. He was on pretty big wages as well. But good luck to him. He's been a star for PSG.
Well, we wish him and Ben Chilwell luck in their new adventures. Listen, thank you very much indeed for that, Andy. When we come back for the last hour of tonight's edition of Trans Europe Express, we've got a load of things I've got to do, including, of course, making contact in South America with Tim Vickery. You are the listening millions. He's Andy Brassell. I'm Danny Kelly. It's a perfect arrangement. Still an hour to go.
Tyson Fury, Floyd Mayweather, Canelo Alvarez. Just hearing these names makes you think money and the hundreds of millions of dollars, pounds or Saudi riyals in boxing. But that's at the top. At the bottom, it isn't quite the same. Even for those on the rise, there's not an awful lot of cash in the boxing world. And if you're just starting out, well, it can be a very costly exercise indeed. But don't take my word for it. Here's the former European champion, talkSPORT's Spencer Oliver.
You're turning professional and you're boxing, let's say, York Hall on a non-televised fight. You have to sell tickets to earn any money, but you have to cover the wages of your opponent as well. So if you don't have the ability to be able to sell enough tickets, you effectively have to pay to fight.
A far cry then from Jake Paul facing Mike Tyson in 2024, when the purse was reported to be around £48 million. But the vast amounts of cash lining the top dog's pockets isn't the norm in a typical fight.
Let's say you're lucky and you get between 5 and 10 grand. You're going to get 10 grand max for that. 10% goes to the trainer, 25% goes to the manager. Then we've got the tax man to pay as well. So we're cutting that money in at least half. So now you've got 5 grand for a 10-week camp. So you're talking about a guy here earning, he might be clearing 500 quid a week. How do you support a family on that? So boxers chase the dream. And, you know, there's probably 2% of them that actually make it.
So say you do make it and you start to rise up the ranks. Strikers Boxing, a training academy, says the mid-tier fighters can earn more, somewhere between £10,000 and £50,000 a fight, depending on record, profile, opponent and popularity of weight class. It's only at the top level does the real cash start flowing in, with the top-tier professionals, i.e. those going for titles, earning 6 figures a fight. Something else you'll have heard of is the terms prize fighter or journeyman. A prize fighter is, as it sounds, someone who picks up fights where they can and gets a nice big check if they win. Journeymen are the fighters who take on up-and-comers, effectively used for experience in the ring. Even if they're going up against the real prospects, a young Anthony Joshua, for example, these guys will be lucky to earn more than 10 grand. So the average boxer isn't as rich as you'd think.
Yeah, welcome back to the third and final hour of tonight's edition of Trans Europe Express. I'm Danny Kelly, as always, and very much as always as well, Andy Brassell. We're always glad to have you along with us as well for the rest of the programme. During that time, we'll be talking about the big game in the United States, Inter Miami against Seattle Sounders in the League's Cup. That's a tournament between teams from USA and Mexico. We'll be talking about everything that's been going on in Germany, including, you know, because we speculated last week, but Erik ten Hag has gone, and man, has he fought back this week against the idea that he's no good. Then Andy will take you around the leagues, including trying to shuffle with Andre Onana's move, exactly what's going on with goalkeepers in Turkey. All that's coming up very, very soon, and it means, of course, that we start, as we always do, by connecting via various cables and satellites to South America, to Tim Vickery. Welcome back, everybody, to Trans Europe Express. Yeah, let's get straight to Tim. Hello, Tim. How are you?
I'm very, very well. Is that fella? Is it Antoine Decaune? You know, the friend who used to pretend.
Yes.
Euro. Is he still around? Yeah, that's the one. That's the one. Can't you get him to do a trail for the programme. It will be fantastic. And now we talk to Cher, that is a singer, and not the thing that you sit in, although I think she would sing if you sat on air. He would be brilliant to do a trail for this show. Sorry, a little flight of fancy there. How are we all doing?
No, it is good. It is very good for our teenage listeners to hear you banging on about a programme from 35 years ago. And trust me, I'm guilty of it all the time. And why not? Why not? Just because it's in the past doesn't mean it's not right. Tim, I'm going to say this, the tortuous programme of qualifiers for South America is nearly over. We've nearly worked out who the 2 or 3 teams who are going to miss out are going to be. Tell us about this last round of qualifiers.
I'm going to hit back, actually, and say delete tortuous and insert magnificent. Because Andorra, for crying out loud, some of these places are like bus stops, and they've got a national team. And, they're a nation. They've got a right to have a national team. But it does mean that I look at the European qualifiers and think, what's the point? The South American qualifiers, they're fabulous. Yes, because of the expansion of the tournament. I did worry going into this one that it would be a drag, but it hasn't proved that at all. It's still proved really competitive, with some epic games, some wonderful narrative lines, and it's proved thoroughly worthwhile. And I'll be very sorry to see it go, but go it does. Seconds out, ding ding, round 18, the last round is on Tuesday, and we haven't got much left to decide, because the automatic qualification places done, signed, sealed, delivered. We already had Argentina through by a landslide. We had Brazil and Ecuador through as well. They have been joined by Uruguay, by Paraguay and Colombia. So the thing that we've got left is who is going to get the playoff place. And even that's interesting, because it's either going to be Bolivia, who haven't been to a World Cup since the last time it was in North America in 1994, or we're going to get Venezuela, who are the one side in South America who have never been. So there's drama right down to the last. The situation is as follows. Venezuela lead by a point, and they have a massive goal difference advantage. They are at home to Colombia. If they win, it's theirs. Any other results, and they can be overtaken by Bolivia if Bolivia beat Brazil. Bolivia beating Brazil, I hear you say. This game takes place not in the altitude stronghold of La Paz, where Bolivia historically play their games, but even higher, the El Alto district, which is where the airport is, 4,100 metres above sea level. Carlo Ancelotti has never seen this in his life as Brazil coach. His kid, David, who's now coach of Botafogo, he took his team up to the altitude, not quite as high, at Quito of Ecuador, and he blew that one when Botafogo got knocked out of our Champions League, the Libertadores. So we'll now see if the father can do any better than the son. So plenty of drama, and it's going to go right down to the wire.
Talking of blast from the past, as you were at the beginning, we saw a bit of a comeback in the Brazil team, didn't we, this week, Tim, with Lucas Paquetá, maybe not quite as long as Antoine Decaune since he'd been involved at the sharp end. But Paquetá came back. He scored as well. How has that gone down? He was such an important player for Brazil before his ban. So how does he change their candidature for the World Cup?
If they can get him back and flying, I think it's very important. I think we were looking at a situation just before all the scandal that engulfed his life when he might have been, certainly potentially, the most important player in the team, because he gives them something that they don't really have. And if you look at Argentina in the week, and Argentina beat Venezuela 3-0, just a delight of angled passes, just beautifully constructed moves. Brazil, there's a lot of huff and puff and individual talent and verticality, but they don't, in that zone of elaboration, they don't have quite the same, the eye for a pass. And Paquetá is the one who can give it to them. The beauty of him, and Ancelotti has identified it and leapt right into it, is that he can give you so many different positions. He can play at the 10 if you want to do that. He can play deeper in midfield. He can play in a wide attacking role. He can even play at centre forward. I've seen him play games for Brazil when he's done 3 functions in the course of the same game. So I think it's important to get him back. And it looks like he's going to start against Bolivia on Tuesday. And the problem that the coach has in terms of building his side is there's so little to learn. I mean, the altitude makes it such a one-off that it's just a case of getting through it. Obviously, the coach is learning about his players just through being with them. But the Chile side that they played on Thursday night, they beat 3-0. Really was an appallingly weak side that bottom of the table Chile with a stand-in coach put out. So this is Ancelotti's problem, that no European friendlies until next year because you're all busy with your, playing Andorra and other bus stops in your World Cup qualification. So he's got a couple of games in October. It looks like they're going to be Japan and South Korea, and maybe a couple of games against African opposition in November, and then 2 in March, and that's it. The formation that they've used the last 2 games, which have been at home, it's almost a 4-2-4 with just Casemiro and Bruno Guimaraes in central midfield. And Casemiro was saying after the game they're not going to be able to do that against stronger opponents, especially given Casemiro's age. You don't want him covering that amount of ground. So they will certainly, I think, want a third man in the midfield area, and I think it could well be Paquetá.
Tim, we shouldn't overlook the fact that the legend that is Lionel Messi was playing what we're led to believe was his last competitive game in Argentina.
Well, I can't see how he's going to be around for any more, especially because the next World Cup with Argentina, one of the how many hosts? 17?
About 6, I think, isn't it, in total?
Yeah. I don't think they're going to have to qualify. So, the next qualifying game would be a long, long time. He's not going to play on Tuesday away at Ecuador. He's not playing that one. So it was, in terms of competitive matches, it was a farewell on Thursday night at home to Venezuela, and he lived up to it. He was terrific. He was scored 2. The other one, he helped Lyon with one of those beautifully angled passes. The good news for Argentina, though, is they're not as dependent on him as they were. On the emergence of Thiago Almada, that partnership between Almada and Alvarez, they looked at Mastrantuono on Thursday. I've seen him all the way up. I like him a lot. I worry about him a little bit, and I worry about the move that he's made to Real Madrid. I'm not sure the rhythm of the game is quite quick enough. We shall see. He's gonna have to improve in that. Looks like Nico Paz, who's very highly rated, not very well known over here because Nico Paz is Spanish born. I think he was born in Tenerife. His dad played for Argentina in the 1998 World Cup. He was played over in Europe, so Nico was born there, and all of his career has been in Europe. So he's not very well known in Argentina, but he's another one who's coming through as they look to replace Di Maria, which is, I think, a tough ask as well. Yes. Garnacho will hope with his move to Chelsea that he can get his career back on the rails, because he looked like he was going to be the man, and it really hasn't happened for him at all. But I think Argentina's major problem is the fact that defensive unit hasn't changed since the last World Cup.
Tagliafico, Otamendi, Christian Romero, and help me with the right back. It's the same gang, isn't it?
Yeah, Molina. It's exactly the same defensive unit. They've got a chance to look at something else because, and this probably won't come as a huge surprise, Mr. Kelly, sir. Romero picked up a yellow and is suspended for the game on Tuesday night.
I'd expect nothing less from the great man.
Indeed. So that will hasten his return perhaps to North London, and maybe they'll have a look at Balerdi. But no one has really come through impressively in the centre-back zones.
No. Look, we've been saying, Tim, and I'm going to keep this theme up until someone puts me right, because of the weirdness of the tournament in Mexico, United States and Canada, the vast differences in time zones and in temperatures in some of these games. They're indoors, some of them are under roof, some of them are outdoors and all the rest of it. I can't see an obvious favourite for this World Cup. I think all 7 previous winners can win it. I think the Portugal can win it too. How do you think? Where are Argentina right at the moment? Is the lack of support for Romero at the back Of course, they got Martinez as well as a goalkeeper. Is that their weakness? Is that why they won't win the World Cup?
Well, I think that the main case against them is they're trying to do what has never, ever been done before. No one has ever retained their title in a different continent. And I'm not sure many of your listeners are quite aware of just how vast the Americas are. You know, North America and South America, it is a different hemisphere. The distance between Buenos Aires and Mexico City, let alone the venues in the States and Canada, but just Buenos Aires and Mexico City is further than that between London and a number of cities in India. So wow. you are talking about an entirely different climate, an entirely different hemisphere. So it's a huge ask. No one has ever done it before. I think you're right. The question mark against them is when that defensive unit that buckled in almost every knockout game. And surely you're thinking one of those times it's going to buckle and it's going to cost them. Brazil are still an unknown factor at the moment because you don't really know what the side is. And you can see little sketches, but it's so early in the Ancelotti reign. He's had so little time, and so they're an unknown quantity. Ecuador are very interesting. It's now 1 goal conceded in 10 games. That defensive unit is extraordinary, but you don't know where the goals are coming from. I think it's now 4 consecutive 0-0 draws, so it's hard to see them winning. Uruguay have just thrown a good couple of results together, but it was kind of home bankers. In the last one, Peru, and Peru concluded their away matches, all 9 away matches. Do you know how many goals they managed to score away from home in this campaign? The answer would be a mere 0. Not a single goal away from home. They're dreadful. So, you know, Peru is one of your home bankers. The Uruguay side for a while hasn't been adding up to the sum of its parts. And the Bielsa model, you know what they're going to do. You know, it has become a little bit predictable. And it is a side that's based, as Bielsa says himself, it's based on dynamism. Can they pace themselves through a tournament? I have my doubts, especially in the extreme conditions. I think a lot of it, so much might well depend on aspects such as the luck of the draw. And you'll remember USA 94, where Italy were a little bit peeved at playing East Coast and having to trek all across the country for the final in the Pasadena Rose Bowl. I don't think Brazil went East Coast once, you know. So those kind of things add up during the course of the tournament.
They will do, yeah.
I think kind of luck of the draw elements are going to be a significant factor in next year's tournament.
Tim, well, we're almost certain now who the South American qualifiers will be. I can't wait for it, of course. Every time the World Cup comes around, I think, oh, God, another World Cup. And then as soon as it's on the horizon, I can't wait for it to arrive. I've got to get through a whole season of football across Europe before then. Thank you very much indeed, Tim Vickery there. And when we come back, we'll be talking about another game in which Lionel Messi played, the League's Cup final in the United States. I'll tell you all about that when we come back in a few seconds' time. Not a great day for Inter Miami. You're listening to Trans Europe Express. Yeah, welcome back to Trans-Europe Express. Now, we started by telling you about the PSG players who got injured in the recent World Cup qualifiers, and we were moaning about the amount of football the players are expected to get through. Well, it's not just in Europe, because in the United States, Mexico and Canada, they have their own leagues, they have the international matches and all the rest of it, and of course they're hosting the upcoming World Cup between those three countries, but they also have a tournament that crosses the borders of those three countries, the best clubs from the United States, Mexico and Canada, and we had the final in the last few days. To help us understand what went on with that, I'd like to say we're joined from the United States now by our great friend and colleague Brian Chiaretta. Hello, Brian.
Hi, thank you very much for having me. Good evening.
Thank you very, very much indeed. So this tournament, which it takes place in Canada and the United States, but it includes clubs from Mexico. We got the final last weekend. It was Inter Miami against the Seattle Sounders. And Inter Miami, if I might be so bold, are Barcelona's team from a few years ago. Luis Suarez, Lionel Messi, Sergio Busquets, Jordi Alba, plus Rodrigo de Paul, who's gone there from Atletico Madrid. They look to me, at least in their prime, like a very, very strong team, Brian. But they got a hammering.
Well, I mean, I don't think it's that surprising. I mean, when you realize that they lost last year in the first round of the playoffs, they lost earlier this year in the CONCACAF Champions League easily. They were blown out by Vancouver. And now they get into the final of this. They go to Seattle, and it was really one-way traffic, 3-0. Very convincing result. So yeah, I think Inter Miami. They certainly they have moments of being able to make magic. They can have some games where everything goes their way and they blow out opponents. But when they go up against good teams, they're in trouble.
And of course, Brian, the thing that everyone will have seen, probably ahead of the result, is Luis Suarez absolutely losing his mind. I mean, I guess the Luis Suarez Hall of Shame, amazing player as he's been, this probably doesn't come in the top 3 or 4, but a pretty awful incident at the end, and he's been punished accordingly. Well,
I think the punishment's just for this tournament, right? As of right now, so people are starting to think if there's going to be something more in terms of MLS play. But
he's only banned for this tournament games. He's only banned for games of the League's Cup.
The next year for League's Cup, yes. Yeah.
Right, okay.
What did he do? What did he do, Brian?
Well, he went up to a Sounders assistant coach who's an elderly person, by the way. That's what kind of makes this a little worse when you think about, like, he's not going against people who can defend themselves against a professional athlete. Let's put it that way. So, when you bite another player, the other player is physically able to hit back,
Yes.
Not that they often do, but they can defend themselves. This is a player. He's big. This is a man. He's bigger than this guy. He's much younger than this guy. This guy's a senior citizen. He stepped on his foot, and so a guy couldn't get away and got in his face and spit on him. So I think I kind of think it's among the worst that he's done.
Right.
When you think about like who the victim was. So yeah, I mean, so it was an assistant coach for Seattle. Busquets hit another player on Seattle, and he's suspended for 2 games in this tournament, like next year. But again, it's another player. It's another guy who can still theoretically defend himself. So yeah, it's a real and on top of it too, they signed him taking a risk, right? All the stuff in his past has been known, so this is not. And they went and took the risk anyway, and it came back to bite them. So, in a sense, Miami looks really bad in all this too. So it was a really, really ugly moment.
Yeah, I mean, Andy, I take your point. He's been a great player, Luis Suarez, but he's also been a terrible nuisance to the game. Let's be truthful about it.
Yeah.
And Brian, Inter Miami, I understand why. Obviously, Messi being the absolute superstar of global football, I understand why they brought in these very, very famous players at the end of their careers from Europe. But does a result like this mean that they'll change their policy? Because you can't depend on 35-year-olds forever, and particularly as the soccer in the United States and Canada is improving all the time.
Yeah, I mean, it's getting younger and younger. Hey, look, they can make the decisions they want to make. They do bring in a lot of young players. They have some Argentine like U23 players who are like young stars of the Argentine league. So they are bringing in younger players. You know, and those players do produce goals and assists. But you know, they don't have anyone in their prime years in defense on that back line. So either they go with young players who are kind of getting exposed for being naive and still learning the game, or they're bringing in older guys who just get kind of beaten. You know, it's they have a lot to figure out. And look, you know, Mascherano is the head coach, and Mascherano is a great player. But Mascherano has, you know, his only coaching to date has been Argentine youth teams that were very unsuccessful. So, you know, there's a lot of question marks, you know, about this team and how it can sustain itself, you know, going into the future when, like, you know, you don't even know who's, you know, what the policy is, who's making all the decisions, how big of an insight does Messi have, and then why they're bringing in coaches that are kind of like friends of the players as opposed to coaches who've had some kind of success.
Brian, I wanted to briefly ask you about the League's Cup itself. I mean, as we know, teams from MLS and Liga MX playing each other. What does this tell us about the relative strengths of the league at the moment, that we haven't had a Mexican finalist since Lyon in 2021? And how seriously the teams take it, because it is quite a new competition, of course, started in 2019, but we had a couple of years out because of COVID and what have you. So what is the status of the League Cup at the moment? And is there a risk that American teams are just starting to dominate it?
No, I mean, because look, you have the CONCACAF Champions League, which, you know, tends to do well with Mexican teams. You have the League Cups that tends to do well with MLS teams. My theory behind that is the Champions League takes place in like the preseason and very early season in MLS, and that hurts MLS teams. And the League's Cup is kind of the opposite. It takes place in the midseason for MLS and very early season for Liga MX, and that puts Mexican teams at a disadvantage. You know, and yeah, they don't have to. MLS teams don't have to travel to Mexico, which is a huge advantage. But they do have a lot of neutral site games and a lot of games where Mexican fans dominate. So, you know, that's more like, you know, I don't know how big of an advantage that is. But on the flip side, you know, look, it's, you know, any kind of, I think they take it seriously. There's a lot of money involved. There's CONCACAF Champions League spots involved. And I think the leagues are very compatible, you know, particularly, you know, I mean, I think MLS still has teams, the 30-team league, and the bottom teams can still make big money investments in ways that not many leagues really can. I mean, I think Liga MX is very top heavy with the Club Americas and all the top teams, the usual faces at the top. So we're figuring this out. It takes a couple more years to play out, but I think they're comparable.
Yeah, well, that's thank you very much indeed for that report. As I say, Inter Miami beaten 3-0 by the Seattle Sounders. And when you look at the team they put out, it's both a surprise they should lose 3-0 and absolutely predictable because they're a team without much young legs in them anymore. Thank you to Brian Sciaretto, always brings us the very latest from America. I'm very, very glad to have him here on Trans Europe Express, where next we'll be going to Germany to talk about what's happening with their big clubs, and including, Andy will look back on the sacking of Erik ten Hag after about 35 minutes in the job. Yeah, still 30 minutes to go here of this night's edition of Trans Europe Express. In a little while, Andy will be taking you around the leagues, all the latest from Turkey, Portugal, the Netherlands and Sweden. But first, we have to look, Andy, at the stuff that's been going on in Germany. And our headline, and it's always good when you remind me that I must play Outcast more often, it's I'm sorry, Mr. Jackson, because Nicholas Jackson, having done a Peter Odemwingie in the last day of the transfer window and hanging about at Munich, finally got his move to Bayern, a move that was almost instantly undermined by the ever-flapping jaws of Uli Hoeneß.
Yeah, so you think maybe Bayern can take a deep breath after that scramble towards the end of the transfer window. The fact that Harry Kane, in that very passive-aggressive way, said that the squad wasn't big enough, that they did get the help, that they got Nicholas Jackson in when it looked like it was all taking a really bad turn in the last couple of days of the window. And then Uli Hoeneß just keeps talking and goes into a little bit more detail. Of course, he's challenged on Sport 1 on the programme Doppelpass that's on every Sunday on German television about the loan fee. And he said, well, it's not really 16.5 million euros because the player and the agent paid 3 million of it, so we only paid 13.5.
It's still a huge figure for a loan, isn't it?
Yeah, and I suppose it would be more of a big figure if there was an obligatory purchase option.
Sure.
But the purchase option will only become obligatory if he starts 40 matches, according to Uli Hoeneß. And as he said quite bluntly, well, that's not going to happen, so the transfer's not going to become permanent. Now, look,
that's not encouraging Nicholas Jackson, is it?
Look, he's given us so much great in entertainment down the years, Uli Hoeneß, in a number of different ways. But sometimes, you get the impression as Bayern get a bit younger, there must be so many people at the club going, he's still talking. Yeah. He's still talking. I mean, funnily enough, I think if we frame it logically, he's probably right. Because Harry Kane, for example, started 42 games last season. So for Jackson to reach 40 starts feels like it's quite a pinch, especially when you bear in mind in the new year, Jamal Musiala will come back. They've talked about using Jackson in wide positions. Will he be complementary to Kane? Will he play instead of him and give him a rest sometimes? We've already talked many times about that.
Yeah, Harry's really keen on resting when he played the whole game against Andorra.
Yeah, he loves it. I think, of course, that is the difference in the relationship between Pochettino-era Tottenham and England and Bayern. With Bayern and Kane, it's a little bit more transactional. Of course, in that first year, they made him not play in any of the Pokal games. And he sat there with this look on his face like, am I not going to come on? We could win this game if you bring me on. It's like, yeah,
I know that look, yes.
We're giving you a rest. But, obviously, I think something has to give. I think for Kane's good as well as Bayern's. But even if we do the numbers and we imagine Kane resting more than he's ever rested before, getting to 40 starts, I think, is going to be quite difficult for Nicholas Jackson. So having got that transfer over the line, having Uli Hoeneß come out and actually say that though, is probably not a great feeling.
Yeah, I mean, look, let's be honest, for him to make those numbers, it would require, and I absolutely don't want to bring this down, it would require an injury to Kane, wouldn't it? And neither Bayern Munich nor England can afford that in a World Cup year.
No.
All right, Andy, Bayer Leverkusen have a new manager, and I don't mean Erik ten Hag. He was the old manager who lasted, was it 2 league games? First tell us about the new manager, then tell us what the hell's gone on there. How they made such a catastrophic error in their own mind by Leverkusen?
I think it's interesting that when the sporting director, Simon Rolfes, who of course used to play for the club, talked about it afterwards, he said, and he gave a statement like almost immediately in front of cameras to journalists when the news about Ten Hag being sacked came out last Monday. He said, well, look, I've made a mistake, but I would make it a bigger mistake if I didn't do anything about it. And what quickly became clear is we talked about their implosion of Werder Bremen last week. What was clear is that wasn't the reason. And there were rumours that they were considering his position before the game at Werder Bremen. So automatically, we as people who love to watch football think, oh, they really need a result there. And then they don't get that result. They lose a 3-1 lead when Werder Bremen are down to 10 men, and you think, okay, he's heaped a load more pressure on him there. But as Rolf has told it, It's nothing really to do with that. That like the performances and the results in the opening 2 league games have been very poor. I thought they were really poor in the Pokal match against 4th-tier opposition, despite the fact they won quite comfortably in the end. And it was clear that that wasn't all of it. That the fact is that there was not really a click at the club with not just the staff, but the players, his coaching staff. It was a completely new coaching team. He didn't just bring in his guys. He tried to bring in a fresh backroom staff, which I think is quite laudable in a way. And of course, Ten Hag hit back at this in his own statement and said, look, I didn't feel there was a relationship of trust, and we've changed the whole team. You know, loads of players have gone, which is true. But the fact is that he clearly had no authority. And that was based on a number of things. I mean, you go back to right at the start when they're on that tour of Brazil, they lose 5-1 to the Flamengo under-20s. And he says in slightly fruitier language that he couldn't give a monkeys about the result. And which is fine to think. I don't think it's fine to say out loud. On top of that, the club square it with him that they're selling Granit Xhaka. And then he comes out in the very next press conference, says, I don't want us to sell Granit Xhaka. Let's not do that. We're not going to do that. And Rolfes and Fernando Caro, the CEO, are sitting there thinking, hey, what's gone on here? Yeah. And then you get Mark Flecken, the goalkeeper, who's only just arrived, absolutely tearing strips off the team's performance to journalists after the first game. And in a happy dressing room, that doesn't happen after one game. That just doesn't happen, especially not from a new player. So really, they've got to find someone who's a safe pair of hands. It might be, it seems, Kasper Hjulmand, who, his former assistant when he was in charge of the Danish national team for a long time, very successfully, of course, got them to the semi-finals of Euro 2020 a few years ago. His old assistant coach is now head of the academy in Leverkusen, so there's the connection. I mean, obviously, every appointment is a risk, but it feels like Hjulmand, despite the fact it didn't work out for him in the Bundesliga before, he succeeded Thomas Tuchel at Mainz 11 years ago, and it didn't work at all. So we'll see how it goes, but he's one of the candidates, and it feels like he might be one of the safer ones.
They've got to be really careful at Bayer. They could throw away all the wonderful things they did in the last 2 years, but you know, by a couple of rash appointments, overselling their team, and all the rest of it. Finally, Andy, Stuttgart got a lovely, jubbly chunk of money from Newcastle for Nick Voldemade. It's not fair to say that they didn't get to spend it. They did. They brought in good players like El Khanous, but they didn't get another centre forward.
No, they didn't. And that's a real problem for them, because not only Voldemade went, but like the day after Voldemade's move was made official, there was an injury to Dennis Undav, who has been probably their best striker over the last couple of years, a medial knee ligament injury, which is going to keep him out for about another 3.5 weeks. And so they needed to go out and get somewhere. Well, of course, when other clubs can smell money, when they can smell deadline, and when they can smell desperation, you know, you could be the greatest sporting director in the world, and Florian Valgamuth is pretty good. But, you know, try not to get your pants pulled down on deadline day. It's almost impossible, I would suggest. So they think they're getting Hyun-Gun Oh from Genk, a really speedy sort of forward. Not quite like Voldemade, but someone with that sort of dash, I suppose. They think they've got it in the bag for 20 million. Genk asked for 27 at the final minute, and they're like, we're not having that. But I guess it shows you that we always think of, you know, the Premier League is all powerful. No one can touch the Premier League, and therefore the money exists in a bubble. It doesn't exist in the bubble, because of course, once you spend it, it has massive knock-on effects elsewhere in the football economy. But I think despite the fact that Undav is injured for the moment, they're right to keep their powder dry till the winter window.
Listen, thank you for all of that. That's Germany done now. And in a few minutes' time, we'll be back again. Andy will take you around the leagues. We'll talk about Turkish goalkeepers, the last day of the transfer window in Portugal, and also Ajax moving players in and out very late in the window as well. You're listening to the last knock-ins of tonight's edition of Trans Europe Express. Andy, we've got a few minutes left to go around the leagues. I know you want to start in Turkey, and really a lot of goalkeepers moving into, out of and around that football-mad country.
Yeah, all about the goalies, Danny. So we've thought for a long time that Ederson would be leaving Manchester City and off to the Turkish Super League. We didn't imagine it would be Fenerbahce who pulled a great coup off in getting him. And it's funny, having moved on from Jose Mourinho, it's been felt for a while that one of their biggest problems is properly building from the back. And the feeling is that having a goalkeeper who can actually play is going to make a massive difference to them, that maybe he's the most important player that they could have bought ahead of Milan Skriniar, ahead of John Duran, ahead of Marco Asensio. Remember Marco Asensio signed for Fenerbahce in the last few days of the window as well. So we still don't know who the new Fenerbahce coach is going to be. Apparently Luciano Spalletti, who's number one choice, has ruled himself out. But he's got a lot to work with anyway. We'll maybe come back to that in a second. Just saying that Galatasaray, having not managed to get Donnarumma, having not managed to get Ederson, as we said, not managed to persuade Dibu Martinez to come either. They splashed on the final day of the window on Uğurcan Çakır, who is the goalkeeper of the Turkish national team, who's at Trabzonspor before, of course, knocked for 6 tonight, but nevertheless a really good goalkeeper. Charged 27 million euros on the final day of the transfer window, which is a high price for a goalkeeper anyway, especially in Turkey, I think you would say. But I guess the thing is, if you look at the numbers, they're paying a lot less in wages. So if you're getting a top-ranked foreigner, you're probably paying them 10 million a year now. If they're a household name, they're paying less than 2 million a year for Çakır over the start of his contract. It incrementally goes up, but they won't be paying him much more than that if it gets to the 4th or 5th year. And you know what? I think to have that Turkish core to the team, when you have so many obviously high quality foreigners coming in, is quite an important thing. Of course, talking of high quality foreigners, we have to talk about the deposing of Jose Mourinho. Yes. And the president of Fenerbahce, Ali Koç, the richest man in Turkey, has broken his silence about it. Of course, it followed them getting knocked out of the Champions League by Benfica. Ali Koç had this to say on it. To be eliminated by Benfica wasn't a problem, but the manner in which we were eliminated was unacceptable. Remember, they had one shot on target in that second leg in Lisbon. He said, it gave me the sentiment that the football of last year was going to continue. I don't think I've heard a more damning sentence than that.
No, and it's becoming the recurring theme of Mourinho's career, isn't it? That people like the fact that he's a big name and he can come in and have an impact, but as soon as you get into the second half of the second year of watching teams parked on the edge of their own penalty area, people just go, this isn't entertainment. This is not what I'm paying my money for. You made the point there that the Turkish goalkeeper has gone from Trabzonspor, and we hear now that Andre Onana is going to be loaned there from Manchester United for a year. I know we've got very little time left. I'll just throw this in here. I know they're getting Donnarumma, but Manchester City must be pretty confident about letting Ederson go, because to me, he's 31 years of age, absolute peak times for goalkeepers, and he has been a brilliant goalkeeper for many, many years now. Take us to the last day of the transfer window in Portugal, Andy. What went on there?
Yeah, a lot happening there, and we talked about the transfers that didn't quite go through. Of course, Porto got Jakub Kiwior to top off a really good window for them. Of course, they won at Sporting last time out, so they've set out their stall pretty early. Porto and Andre Villas-Boas as well in backing Francesco Farioli and bringing him lots of talent. So I guess that leaves us with straight away the champions, Sporting, twice in a row, trying to get over Victor Gyökeres, if you like, and they were hoping to bring over Jota Silva from Nottingham Forest. Now, look, he turned down some other moves. Some other Premier League clubs were interested in him, and he said no because he wanted it to be only Sporting. So they had it all sorted. They got all the documents in the FIFA transfer matching system. They actually agreed a deal with Marinakis as well, which is no small thing. And then the Portuguese league say, we got the documents 1 minute late. It's not going to go through. 1 minute late. And despite several complaints, that wasn't able to go through. So the least surprising bit of news last week was that Jota Silva wasn't on the list for Nottingham Forest. But on a far more serious note, actually, of course, one of the big signings in the Portuguese league in this transfer window was Georgi Sudakov, brilliant number 10 for Shakhtar Donetsk, who signed for Benfica, was given the number 10 shirt by the president, Rui Costa, which felt like quite a sort of handing over of Excalibur kind of moment.
He's a fabulous player, Sudakov. He really is, yeah.
He really is. But his family are back in Ukraine at the moment. And last night, with one of the Russian attacks on Kyiv, his apartment was bombed, and his block of apartments in which he has an apartment was bombed. Significant damage. His apartment was essentially destroyed, and his 9 months pregnant wife, 3-year-old daughter, and his mother were in it. Fortunately, very fortunately, they were unharmed. The idea has always been that she would have their baby and then go and join him. The family would go and join him in Lisbon, but incredibly worrying. Of course, Benfica have been very, very supportive of him, but just moving to a new club, you can't imagine the worry.
No, and that horrible war is allowed to go on and on and on. And anyone who saw Mr. Putin's speech during the week knows that he has no intention of stopping until he gets exactly what he wants and all of it. Once again, we hope wish nothing but the safety of the people in Ukraine. And of course, you don't want to see Russian soldiers getting killed for nothing either. Andy, then take us to the Netherlands, and Mr. Brobby has moved to Ajax. Sorry, from Ajax to Sunderland.
Yeah, so they've lost an old favourite and brought back an old favourite. So Brian Brobby, you knew he was going to end up in the Premier League at some point. The bustle he's got. Yeah, and I think people underrate the quality he actually has. Remember everything Ajax did to get him back after they originally lost him on a free transfer to Leipzig. But very potentially popular replacement, Kasper Dolberg. Remember him coming back from Anderlecht to join them. Of course, there's a little bit longer left in not just the Belgian transfer window, which is still open, but there was an extra day and a half on the Dutch transfer window, so they're able to get Dolberg over the line.
Listen, Andy, it's been a belting 3 hours. Thank you for everything you've done. Thank you all for listening. I'm back tomorrow at about 2:45 on H&J. Coming up next here on talkSPORT, it's the best of White and Jordan. God bless you all. Good night.